It's my pleasure to say good morning and welcome to the Dental Board of California quarterly meeting. Today is Thursday, May 17th, and I want to ask all of us to please turn our cell phones to silent and make sure they're off the table so we can avoid feedback noise. You may notice that board members are accessing their laptops during the meeting. They are using the laptops solely to access the board meeting materials that are in electronic format. This is an official business meeting of the Dental Board of California. The board welcomes public comment on any item on the agenda, and it is the board's intent to ask for public comment prior to the board taking action on any agenda item. If for some reason I forget to ask for public comment on an agenda item and you wish to speak on that item, please raise your hand and you will be recognized. Depending on the number of people who would like to testify on a particular agenda item, a time limit may be imposed. We ask all speakers to please stay on topic, and if a time limit is determined to be necessary, keep your comments to within that time limit. We will today work together to ensure that public protection is the highest priority in all our decision making. So I would like to call the meeting to order and ask Jerry Westerfeld to please call. Oh, I'm sorry, Yvette is in the room. Hi,
Yvette's
good morning,
in the
Yvette.
house. Good morning.
I will now ask our board secretary to please call the roll.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Burton. Here. Chen. Lei. Here. Lai. Here. Lauren. Here. Okay. Mackenzie. Here. Medina. Morrow. Here. Alago. Here. Did I say that right? Alagi? Yeah. Okay. I only get 3 more tries. Pacheco. I only get 2 more tries. Stewart?
Here.
Witcher? Here. You? Here. Mr. President, we have a quorum.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to recognize one of our new members that we have not introduced, and that is Dr. James Yu of Fremont. And James, I'm going to give you a minute of personal privilege to just say a few words about yourself, and again, welcome to the Dental Board.
Good morning. It's an honor to be on the board, and I'm been a dentist since 1984, and also a licensed acupuncturist in California, and also running a radio broadcast in San Francisco, and then also the president of the Northern California Media Association. Thank you.
We are now on agenda item D, 9D.
9D? I thought it was 10.
Discussion of prospective legislative proposals.
I just want to clarify for the audience, those of you who weren't here yesterday, we had a very long day, so we did not complete the agenda for yesterday. So what we're doing is going back. We'll be discussing 9D, 9E, then we go to 12, 13, and then we'll actually pick up where we are on today's agenda. So we're on 9D. Go ahead, Allison.
Good morning. My name is Allison Viramontes. I'm the Legislative and Regulatory Analyst for the Board. In regards to Agenda Item 9D, discussion of prospective legislative proposals, stakeholders are encouraged to submit proposals in writing to the Board before or during the meeting for possible consideration by the Board at a future Board meeting.
Any public comment? Seeing none?
Agenda Item 9E, update on pending regulatory packages. I'm just going to give you a just brief little update about these packages that we have. Regarding continuing education requirements and basic life support equivalency standards, board staff has drafted the initial rulemaking file documents, and it's pending the review and approval process currently. Regarding the dental assisting comprehensive rulemaking, the final workshop took place on March 2nd, 2018, and board staff continues to work on the development of final proposed language and will present it to the board for consideration at a future meeting. Regarding determination of radiograph and placement of interim therapeutic restorations, the initial rulemaking documents are currently being prepared. The elective facial cosmetic surgery permit application requirements and renewal requirements, board staff has drafted the initial rulemaking file documents, and it is pending the review and approval process. Regarding institutional standards, after board staff drafted the initial rulemaking documents and presented those documents to DCA Legal's review, it was determined that a legislative solution might be better aligned with the board's goals as it relates to institutional standards for both foreign and domestic dental schools, but board staff will continue to research this and present their findings and recommendations at a future board meeting. Regarding licensure by credential application requirements, staff has incorporated recommendations in the development of regulatory language and presented it to the board during the December 2016 meeting, at which time it was decided that the discussion would be tabled into a future board meeting. After reviewing the current regulations, it was determined that a legislative solution would be better aligned with the board's goals as it relates to the license by credential pathway to licensure, and board staff will present these findings and recommendations at this board meeting that outlines this legislative solution in a separate agenda item during the review of new issues regarding the board's sunset review report. Regarding mobile dental and portable dental unit registration requirements, the initial rulemaking documents are currently being prepared. Regarding citation and fine, board staff has drafted the initial rulemaking file documents, and it is currently pending the review and approval process. Regarding the minimum standards for infection control, so board staff met with the Infection Control Subcommittee in March 2018 regarding possible amendments to the minimum standards for infection control regulations that would meet the statutory required deadline, as well as clarify existing language within Section 1005. The Dental Hygiene, Committee presented their proposed regulatory language at their April 2018 meeting, and the language was approved, and board staff will present the proposed language for the board's consideration to initiate the regular rulemaking during a separate agenda item at this board meeting.
Thank you, Allison. Any questions, board members? Understand that for our new members, this is a lot of process that is probably new, and so it's going to take some time to understand how all that works. And after 4 or 5 years, I'm still trying to understand it myself. So don't be shy about asking any questions.
Yeah, for the new members, most boards maybe do 2 or 3 rulemakings per year. You can see we do a lot more. This is a lot of work. And, staff does a phenomenal job putting these things together. There's a lot of very complicated filings that have to be done. Also, the department has kind of augmented their review process, so there's additional layers of review that it has to go through. So it's really an arduous thing and takes a lot of their time. So this is one of the main things we do, though, is, regulations. So it's an important responsibility, but I think without the backup of strong staff, we wouldn't be getting anything like this done.
And I will just add that if another time you want more clarity in trying to understand this process, that Sarah or Karen or myself would be Dr. Witcher, a number of us would be happy to have that conversation with each of you. So please understand that this is a work in progress, and you're going to be enjoying input, but it's going to take a little while to get your feet underneath you. So we understand that too. Karen?
So there are at least 3 board members, I believe, the new board members who have signed up for the board member orientation on June 6th, and the regulatory process will be reviewed at that time. So you'll be able to at least walk through preliminarily what the regulatory process is. Things will then begin to make more sense as we walk through some of these. I'd like to say at this time that Allison's last meeting is today. I fired her. No, not really.
That's not true.
She's taking a promotion and moving on to a different agency. So we wish you luck.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the work that you've put in. She's been a short timer with us, not even a year yet. So she's moving on, which will mean that we will be a bit stalled again in our legislation and our regulations. And so we'll be recruiting for that position. I think we've started recruiting for that position. We'll try to fill it as quickly as we can. It's a difficult position to fill. As you know, there's a lot of work that's required, not only tracking the legislation, but the documents that go through the regulatory process. It dawned on me, the board has probably never seen a package other than just the language. And the actual language that you approve is a small part of the entire package that has to be presented for a rulemaking file. You have a complete background, you have all these sections of it, and what you see is a couple of pages of language, and what we submit is a 3-ring binder full of paper. I mean, it's enormous. And that binder goes through a series of reviews by a number of different people after it leaves our office. So it's a huge job. As Dr. Witcher said, we try to stay on top of things that need to be clarified, and that's primarily why we have regulations, to clarify statute. So we've got we continue to have a large task in front of us, and we'll be recruiting to fill your position. But Allison, best wishes for your future endeavors.
Thank you.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Is there any public comment on this last section, pending regulatory packages? Seeing none, I think we're moving on to number 10. Discussion and possible action regarding rulemaking to amend California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 1005, relating to minimum standards for infection control.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Wallace. I'm the Assistant Executive Officer of the Board. Today, we are presenting proposed regulatory language for the Board's consideration to initiate a rulemaking to amend the Board's minimum standards for infection control. Just to provide a little bit of background, our statute within the Dental Practice Act requires the Board and the Dental Hygiene Committee to establish a consensus of potential amendments to the minimum standards for infection control. The Dental Hygiene Committee utilizes our minimum standards for infection control as well as the board. We are required to review the regulation on an annual basis. The regulation has not been updated since 2011, but we have been meeting on an annual basis. There has been a subcommittee established consisting of Dr. Lay and Ms. Noelle Kelsch from the Dental Hygiene Committee. We've met on an annual basis to review the regs, and most recently we met this year where it was determined that we probably needed to move forward with a proposal to update the regulations due to significant changes made in the CDC guidelines relating to dental office infection control. So there's a few things going on here. So I wanted to kind of explain where we are because this is kind of a convoluted process. As you'll recall, yesterday we were talking about Assembly Bill 1277 that had passed last year, requiring the board to promulgate emergency regulations relating to water lines. And the board at its November meeting and in its February meeting have already initiated rulemaking language, and rulemaking language is also considered a regulation, to implement the provisions of that bill. And so that's moving forward in an emergency rulemaking.
which also happens to be the same section that we're proposing to make amendments in today. So you'll see the language from that proposal in this package as well. At this point, it's in section 19. Staff is not recommending that we make any amendments to that language. So I just take that one aside. Don't pay attention to 19 because we've already moved on with that one. So back to where we are. Now, we are working on promulgating a regular rulemaking file. Board staff met with Dr. Lay and Ms. Noel Kelch in March and finalized proposed rulemaking language. The language that's provided in your board meeting packets today were established via consensus. It was brought forward to the Dental Hygiene Committee at their meeting in April, which they approved, and it's my understanding that they did not have any comments or concerns. And so at this point, it's the board's responsibility to promulgate the regulation and take it through the process. So we're bringing it forward to the board today. You'll see behind the memo, pages 1 through 7 include all of the proposed language. Language that's underlined is new language. Language that's striked out is intended to be deleted. And what we're asking the board to do today is make a motion to consider and possibly approve the proposed regulatory language relative to the minimum standards for infection control and direct staff to take all steps necessary to initiate the formal rulemaking process, including noticing the proposed language for 45-day public comment, setting the proposed language for a public hearing, and delegating authority to, authority to the executive officer to make any technical or non-substantive changes to the rulemaking package. If after the close of the 45-day public comment period and public regulatory hearing, no adverse comments are received, delegate authority to the executive officer to make any technical or non-substantive changes to the proposed regulations before completing the rulemaking process, and adopt the proposed amendments to California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 1005, as noticed in the proposed text.
Thank you, Sarah.
Question? So we're going to move everything except number 19?
We would move everything with 19, so you'll have two simultaneous regulatory packages going through the process with the exact same language. They have to match up. Now, there's the potential that the omnibus bill may include language that would strike the need for us to carry this in the rulemaking package. And staff will monitor the timeline and then would bring back any proposed amendments to the regulation. So there's potential that we could have a modified, what's called a modified text, presented to the board at a future meeting to delete that provision, and then it would go out for another 15-day public comment.
This is going to take a while before it gets posted, so I think there's going to be ample time because we're not even close to getting this thing noticed for rulemaking. And then we got 45 days and then potentially 15-day periods after that. So, you know, I just want to make sure I had that straight.
Yes, I believe the timeline is adequate enough for us to make those changes if necessary.
I'd like to recognize Dr. Lay and thank her for her work as being part of that subcommittee. And I'd like to also ask you, Dr. Lay, if you have any comments relating to this.
Yeah, so as you heard, Sarah was talking about this process, you know, the Dental Hygiene Committee and the Dental Board, with maybe, you know, appointed to the subcommittee, have been meeting, you know, on an annual basis. So this is a long process. And I think at this point in time, you know, I want to thank Karen, Sarah, and her staff, as well as Anthony Lum and also the Dental Hygiene Committee, for having worked together, collaborated, so that we come up with the proposed language that is now agreed upon, you know, by, hopefully that you will approve it, that will be agreed upon by both, you know, Dental Hygiene Committee, which has already approved the language, now it's our turn. And I, you know, remember this is a minimum standards for infection control. It's not best practices, so I know that some of you may be questioning, you know, the language or whatever, but remember, this is minimum standards for infection control. And I think that the sooner we put it out there for comment, the better we can protect the public. So I would encourage you to, you know, to move forward, you know, with the proposed language as presented by the staff.
Thank you, Dr. Lay, for those comments. Now I'll open it up to any comments from the board.
Dr. Stewart? I have a comment and maybe a suggestion. Item number 24 on page 6. Is my understanding that the term material has been removed from the material safety data sheets, and they are now referred to as simply safety data sheets. This is a BIVA consensus from OSHA and also the Global Safety Institute. Also, the wording here regarding the dental healthcare professional shall follow all material safety data sheet handling and storage instructions. I would consider adding to that and disposal. These materials sometimes require specific disposal processes in order to maintain safety. So I think it would be appropriate to add disposal to that in addition to handling, storage, and disposal.
Sir?
So, I would make the staff recommendation that this language has already gone to the Dental Hygiene Committee, and we have a statutory obligation to reach a consensus. I would recommend at this point, the board consider moving forward with the language printed in the board meeting packet, and that we will have the opportunity, once the end of the 45-day comment period has closed, to bring forward staff recommendations, and which can include additional proposed amendments recommended by the board at that time. So I will make a note of your recommendation.
Yes, I would agree with Sarah that we need to move forward. There would be ample time for us to make any adjustments or any modifications. Because if we made any modifications at this time, it would have to go back to the general hygiene.
I'd like to move this item.
I'll second it. Stewart? No, public comment?
We need to have public comment
Yvette,
first.
I'm sorry. Let's go ahead and ask for public comment.
Mary McCune, CDA. First comment, I wanted to echo what Dr. Morrow said regarding the name of the sheet that's referenced on page 6. The second comment we wanted to make, and we want to be sensitive to the fact that any adjustments would have to go back to DHCC, so we're happy to make these comments formally during the 45-day comment period. So section 22 regarding dental unit water lines, we would just like to respectfully suggest that it says instead of dental unit water lines shall be monitored, substitute that word for maintained. This would provide more clarity to our members as to how the section would be followed.
Okay, thank you. Further public comment? Seeing none, I think we're ready for the vote. Yvette?
Okay, thank you. Burton. Yes. Chan. Chappelle Ingram, yes. Lay. Yes. Lauren. Yes. Lee. Lay. Mackenzie.
Yes.
Medina. Morrow. Yes. Alagi. Pacheco. Okay. Stewart.
Yes.
Witcher.
Yes.
You.
Yes.
It passes.
Thank you, Yvette.
All I saw was that.
12. I believe we're on item 12.
Item 12A, an update on the board's portfolio pathway to licensure. At the last meeting in February, The dental board staff had provided an update on the 4 short-term goals that had been identified as a result of a meeting with the dental school deans last fall. Those included clarifying patient criteria regarding each of the competency examinations, researching the reciprocity requirements in other states, informing the public and interested parties about the portfolio pathway, and digitizing the portfolio rubrics and grading sheets. At the February meeting, board staff had reported on the successful completion of the first 3 short-term goals and provided the board with information regarding the patient criteria, the reciprocity requirements, and the updates to the board's website. Board staff has been working on the digitizing of the portfolio rubrics and grading sheets and has reached out to the dental schools to see what best practices they have to recommend to make this process easier. We have also been invited to attend a meeting today that has been coordinated by the California Dental Association that they are hosting at their event in Anaheim. And with the help of CDA, board staff plans to meet with all 6 of the California dental school deans to address any questions and concerns. I'd be happy to answer any question.
Actually, it's, the meeting is scheduled, I believe, at 2, so Drs. Lay and Morrow will be exiting the meeting, and so it probably won't be staff attending that meeting.
Any board comments? Public comment? Seeing none? Thank you, sir.
The last dental examination board review at RAP took place back in October 2017. There has not been another meeting until October 2018. So at this point in time, I don't really have anything to report from the RAP except that I want to remind the board that there have been some changes, in the RAP exam. Number one is the parent section. If the candidate failed, the candidate can retake it on the last day of the exam, and that's something new for 2018. The candidates are required to take one operative procedure. Well, actually, they can take 2, but if they pass the first one, they don't have to take the second one. And that's another change. Another change also is that the RAP has added a PROS section where the candidates can choose to prepare a crown and also a 3-unit bridge. They added that section because there are some RAP states that are now requiring that PROS section. California, at this point in time, does not require that. So the candidates have the option of selecting that PROS section or not. I know the president of RAP, Dr. Norm Magnuson, is here, and he's available to answer any questions that you may have regarding the changes in the exam. I don't think that they have the final results yet because the exams are still taking place, for this year. So anyway, Dr. Magnuson, would you please come to the microphone and see if any of the board members have any questions for you? If not, I guess you can go to Disneyland.
No, I have to head to San Francisco for an exam, so. So I'm Dr. Magnuson, I'm president of REB this year. So if there's any questions?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So are students having trouble finding qualified patients to work on?
Well, this has been a long time problem and concern, years back even. So we have always encouraged the students to find somebody who's from the school, a patient from the school. Actually, I think the periodontal section is probably the hardest section to find somebody who can qualify for the exam. We did our psychometrics last year and studied the last 10 or 15 years of our psychometric analysis of our exam and found out, like I shared with you the last time, or no, I guess it was in the November meeting I was here, shared with you that our psychometric data shows that if a candidate does better than 75%, or what we categorize as a 3.0 on their exam. There's like a 97.5% chance on their next prep that they do, they will get a 3.0 also. So we have no longer made that as a criteria to pass the REB exam. We don't learn anything new from these patients. Well, that has actually helped quite a bit. Instead of having to find two qualifying lesions, now they're only expected to find one. There are a lot of states that still require two preps. There is a state that requires an amalgam along with the composite. There's a number of states that require a class 3, and there's actually a few states that still require two posterior class 2 restorations. That's states' rights issues. We have just found that psychometrically we don't find any new information after taking the second prep. So, yeah, it's always been a problem. And the students always want what they call this ideal prep. They always want this ideal lesion that's just very small and very, very easy to manage. They don't realize that sometimes the small ones on an x-ray end up being huge in the mouth. You've seen that. So they get this false sense of security because they have this, what they think is a small lesion. In actuality, if they just pick a moderate-sized lesion, we have processes for modifications that they can ask for modifications to enlarge the prep. I've told the students before, in reality, you can drive a truck through one of our preps and pass if you go through the right processes and you tell us where the decay is and how much you want to remove, you'll get a passing grade. So in reality, part of the challenge of finding a prep or finding a lesion is more of a student's misconception of what they have to take the exam.
Great, thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Partially, yes.
Well, let's get the other partial done.
Well, back when I came on board 5 years ago, we always heard about the black bus, or there are people that had had patients or had friends that had perfect lesions, and they would basically set them up to, and the student is caught in between because they don't have a patient. And I always felt that that was not a good way of acquiring a qualified patient.
So no, I'm not quite sure if I understand the black bus.
Black bus, that's Dr. Casagrande's. He brought me aboard, and the van, the black van, and the van was if you were taking your exam and your patient didn't show up, you would fail. But there would be a black van outside and they'd swing the door open. There was 10 perfect lesions in there, and these patients are sitting in the bus, and they'd sit for the whole meeting for a price. So that always bothered me.
Well, and we discourage that tremendously. Yes. So let me tell you, I've been doing exams for a lot of years. So normally what happens, and my son just graduated, and so he took the REB here a couple weeks ago, passed with flying colors, just to let you know. And
congratulations.
Yeah, I'm kind of proud. So what his school had done, and most schools do, is they find their patients that they need, and now, especially since they only need one restoration or one lesion, they will make a bank of backups. Mm-hmm. And a lot of schools are putting limits on how much they'll pay a patient. So if a patient sits in the chair and says, one school that I was at here just a few months ago had a $75 max, and a whole class agreed to this. So when a patient would come up and say, I want $200 now, they would say, goodbye. And then they had a backup pool that they would draw from, and the whole school had no problem with that. In fact, it worked beautifully. It was so smooth, and that stress was not there. Mm-hmm. So part of it is the school and the students preparing for an exam. It doesn't make any difference which clinical exam you're taking. You still have to be prepared. You have to be prepared, especially if your perio patient doesn't qualify, because that seems to be the hardest one. You think there's X amount of areas of calculus, and in reality, the examiners, 2 of them, don't agree with you, so you have to find either a different patient or a different quadrant. And if the class prepares as a class, they do quite well. So yes, is that still an issue out there of people paying for patients high dollars? Yes, but typically that's the exception and not the rule.
Okay, so this is preparation.
It's
Basically.
preparation. A lot of it is preparation.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right, any other questions?
Dr. Stewart?
Dr. Morrow?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Number one, could you tell us at this point in time how many states accept the examination for licensure requirement?
So some of the East Coast schools or states are being a little picky right now. You may have heard there's a little turf war going on with the different testing agencies. So we're fighting this battle. We have 41 or 42, 43 states, and that changes from week to week sometimes. We had a couple of states who said, we're not going to accept you, and after being pushed and asked why, they came back and excited to continue, and they've always accepted us, and they've considered to re-accept us. So that number changes, but we're in the mid-40s.
Okay. Secondly, could you explain to me your justification for requiring 2 graders or 2 examiners for your examination?
2 graders for what?
For each preparation?
We have 3 graders.
3 graders, okay.
3 graders.
Multiple graders,
We
let's
have
put
to
it
have
that way.
we have to have 3 graders for each grading section, whatever it is, whether it's the prep or the finish or the perio. We require 1 examiner to approve something. So candidate brings back a DO on number 4, 1 examiner sees that reaches the DEJ, accepts it, it's done. And it meets all the other criteria, there's 3 or 4 of them, meets all the other criteria, it's accepted. If that 1 examiner goes, I'm not sure if that reaches the DEJ, they reject it, and then another examiner has to come over and validate that.
Okay.
If 2 examiners validate that it doesn't reach the DEJ or one of the other criteria aren't met, the patient is rejected. So they can't be rejected on one person's say-so in all situations.
Right.
When they're graded, 3 grade, the high and the low score is taken out, and the median score in the middle is the one that's accepted.
Okay. So in all cases, there are 3 graders?
In all cases, there are 3 graders.
Okay.
If a special circumstance comes up, the team captain may be a part of it, the floor might be a part of it, the chief examiner might be a part of it. In the rare circumstances that you have something that's kind of bizarre, there could be more than 3 examiners to verify.
And at the present time, what is the cost for candidates to take the examination, excluding what they might have to pay for patients?
Let's say 2,400. I don't know the exact amount. $23.95 maybe, or $23.50. I don't remember the exact amount.
Okay, so in the mid-2000s?
Yeah, and that's similar to all testing agencies are within $100 of each other, I think.
Okay, appreciate it, thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions?
Thank you
Thank you,
very
sir.
much.
Public comment? Seeing none? Let's move on to agenda item 13, licensing, certifications, and permits.
Agenda item 13A provides an overview of the licensing statistics that we have for our dentist and other permit categories, including conscious sedation, general anesthesia, medical general anesthesia, the electrofacial cosmetic surgery permit, etc. The meeting materials also provide a breakdown of the number of licenses that have been issued on page 2 via each individual pathway that we have available for licensure as a dentist in California. It also provides a breakdown of the number of active licensees, licensed dentists in each county in California, and provides a breakdown of the number of applications that we have received, broken out by pathway for the year of 2018. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Dr. Lay, would you do me a favor and get Sarah a glass
So
of water?
I'm okay, sorry. It's, tickle.
Can
Sorry.
you, just for clarity, can you explain the difference between retired license and an inactive license?
So a retired license versus an inactive license. Sorry. A retired license is still considered an actively practicing license. The requirement is that the licensee has to be of age to be able to receive Social Security benefits, and predominantly practices not-for-profit on a volunteer basis, but it is considered an active dental license. An inactive dental license is typically used by licensees that no longer want to practice dentistry, or maybe they're practicing dentistry in another state. Whereas they go into an inactive status, they're still required to pay the biannual renewal fee, and, thank you. And, but they are not required to complete the continuing education requirements.
That's for
For
retired.
inactive, that's for inactive. Retired would still have to complete the continuing education requirements. There is a provision in law that they would do a reduced number of continuing education.
And so then, if you're inactive, can you go back to retired?
You can go from inactive
Back to retired.
to retired, but you would have to complete the CE requirements.
Is there a form for that? Is there a?
Yes, if there's an application, it's usually, there's also a reduced fee for the retired renewal status. It's 50%. That's also applicable to the disabled license as well. And there is a form available on our board's website that they would apply, and if they wanted to call the board office or send an email, we would help them through that application process as well.
So that, if you had to advise someone that's retired and they still like to be in the game, it would better to have a retired license then?
It depends on their preference, and sometimes it's a matter of not being able to complete the continuing education, but if they want to continue their active practice and want to practice predominantly not-for-profit, then yes, it would probably be best that they go to the retired status.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. I'd like to ask, I'm sorry.
Dr. Lauren,
Okay.
go ahead.
Just like to ask what the procedure is for the delinquent licenses. Do you send out notices? How many times? How far?
So the delinquent notices, they'll receive a notification immediately after not receiving the licensure renewal by the deadline, and then they'll receive a secondary renewal. They'll receive 2 notices. It will remain in a delinquent status for up to 5 years. After 5 years, it will become canceled, and they would be required to apply for a new license to replace that license.
Dr. Morrow?
Yeah, thank you. I would just like to make a point of attention. On page 2 of the handout that we received under the dental licensing issued via pathway, you notice that obviously the reb examination with over almost 8,500 is the number 1 process by which our licenses are issued. But also look at item number 3, licensure by credential. In essence, there's over 3,000 licenses by credential that we've accepted. So in practice, we are basically accepting the results of any licensing examination, no matter how that individual or applicant received that license. So from a practical standpoint, from a functional standpoint, we accept the results of all licensing examinations, but not as initial licensure. So basically, the reb examination and the portfolio examination in California dental schools and the ADEX exam now is the only way that an applicant can get an initial license to practice dentistry in California. But by the licensure by credential, there's that availability, and irregardless of how you received your license, as long as you meet the requirements for credentialing.
Thank you. Further comments? Public comment? Seeing none, thank you. Sarah?
13B, the general anesthesia and conscious sedation evaluation statistics. Board staff has provided an overview of the number of evaluations that have been conducted over the last year, including the passing and the failure of the evaluation for both general anesthesia and conscious sedation and the medical general anesthesia evaluations. As always, there is a great need for subject matter experts to participate as evaluators for our site evaluations, and we would very much appreciate and welcome new applicants.
Question. Could we maybe put a little more attention on the medical general anesthesia evaluations? We're doing really small numbers, and I know they're particularly difficult, and then there is always a jurisdictional issue there in that we basically can't really take any action against them. But, it's been called to my attention that maybe we're not doing enough in there. So just a little feedback, if we can, if resources allow. I understand there is a challenge that there are requirements for the type of evaluator there. One has to be double degree at least. And so I know there's some constraints, and then it's very hard to schedule those. But since we're sort of caught up in the other categories, maybe we could work on this a little bit.
I'd be happy to meet with you and staff to discuss that further. Agenda item 13C, discussion and possible action regarding evaluators for on-site inspection and evaluations. The board currently requires for on-site inspection for the GA and the CS and the MGA permit 2 evaluators to be available to conduct the evaluation. As we were meeting with board staff regarding new issues to potentially bring forward for sunset review this next year and include in our report, we've had some discussions relating to whether or not it was necessary to have 2 evaluators for subsequent evaluations. And so board staff has put together a proposal for the board to consider today that addresses a couple of concerns that we've had. Historically, we typically have difficulty finding enough evaluators to participate in all of the evaluations. So board staff is proposing that after the initial evaluation, including 2 evaluators, that any subsequent evaluations only be conducted by 1 evaluator. Should there be a failure, then the next evaluation would include 2 evaluators. Board staff also recognizes that there is not a provision in law currently relating to remedial education if a permit holder fails an evaluation. So we have also added in language that after the second failure that the permit holder would need to remediate depending on whether or not they are granted a 3rd evaluation or before they apply for a new permit. And so today we're asking the board to consider this proposal and provide feedback. Should the board want to move forward with this, this would actually take a regulatory change rather than a statutory change, and we would not necessarily need to ask for legislative changes as part of sunset review for this particular issue.
Sarah, I understand this is just process, but for the newer members and some of us, when you say it requires a regulatory rather than a statutory, would you please explain why?
So currently, the Dental Practice Act consists of Section 1600 through about 1999 of the Business and Professions Code. Within the Business and Professions Code, well, the Business and Professions Code is established via the legislative process and being enacted by signature by the governor. The board also has the authority, it's called rulemaking authority, which is the regulatory process to interpret or make specific any of those provisions within that act to provide clarification and more detailed requirements behind it. And those are considered regulations. And so the board has that authority to promulgate regulations. At this point, this particular package would require regulatory change because the statute is very broad. It does not specify the number of evaluators. The statute only requires that an evaluation be conducted. So it's our regulations that detail the number of evaluators. So it's at the board's discretion to determine what is necessary to move forward. So this would require a regulatory change.
Thank you, very helpful.
If I could provide a little background as, you know, sort of having long-term involvement with this program. This was prompted by the fact that first of all, scheduling an office anesthesia evaluation is a very laborious process. You have to get a doctor with time on his schedule. There's a patient, there's a case which has to be done as part of the evaluation process, and then you have to get 2 evaluators. And then you're talking a state as the size of California, where evaluators are often not available in some of the remote areas. So to get all these moving parts together and actually schedule something can take up to 20 phone calls. And what would happen is you'd have the thing all set up and one evaluator would call and say, I can't make it that day. And then you'd have to start all over again. So there was a lot of wheel spinning going on. The pass rate is really quite high on this. And because, you know, most of the permit holders are very familiar with the process. They're given examples of the algorithms which they have to follow during the inspection. And so they know the list of equipment, what their facility has to be, all the things that they need to know are available to them. So, you know, it's always a tough one. Now, where this idea came from was many of the accreditation bodies that accredit hospitals and ambulatory care centers have one site evaluator, because that's, you know, they have a limited manpower pool as well. And so there is precedent for that on the medical side. It's not ideal, but because of the low failure rate, I think there's a deterrent effect in people knowing that an inspection is coming every 5 years, so they kind of whip their office into shape, run their staff through drills, which they should obviously do at least quarterly, but at least there's this one process available. So it's more just the preparation and understanding and, you know, the fact that somebody comes and looks. It may not necessarily have to be 2 people. Ideally, it would be. And so that's why we've reserved the requirement for 2 people for the initial evaluation or any failures where clearly, I mean, just as with any licensing type exam, which this is, there needs to be 2 pairs of a pair of independent evaluators. But anyway, it's sort of a little bit of a compromise because I've tracked the numbers of evaluators back several years. In 2014, we had 350. As of 15, 334. 2016, 304. And 2017, 287. So there's a decline in the number of particularly general anesthesia evaluators. Conscious sedation evaluators are flat, although we are doing more evaluations in that area, which I'm really glad to see. And medical general anesthesia, there's always been small numbers. So, you know, basically for the program to continue, we're going to have to make some concessions unless, you know, evaluators are going to suddenly start signing up, which, you know, we always pitch that wherever we can. You know, to become an evaluator for the new folks, and I could go into more detail on this, but I don't want to take everybody's time, but you have to have had your permit for 3 years, you can't have had any disciplinary actions, and you're examining in the area in which you're knowledgeable. Those are the basic requirements. So that's the background there. And on the remedial education side, you know, failure of the evaluation is not unprofessional conduct or anything like that. Normally, we can only order remedial education as part of a disciplinary action. So there is previously no provision in the law for requiring a permit holder to undergo remedial education if they fail 2 evaluations. In other words, if they fail the first time, they can schedule within 30 days, take and pass the second evaluation. If they pass, they're fine. If they fail the second evaluation, it's referred back to the board for a decision we make in LCP committee as to whether they're going to be granted a 3rd evaluation or denied a permit. And what we're finding is there's kind of a revolving door effect. If they're denied the permit, they just reapply. Now, the good thing is they're not able to practice if they're denied the permit or if they fail the second evaluation. So, but they can easily reapply, and then they have to pass the evaluation. But the ideal is there should be a remedial education element in there to kind of help people get through that. The vast majority of our failures are on the simulated emergencies section, which is, you know, pretty critical. The facilities and equipment is rarely a problem. And interestingly enough, the case demonstration is almost never, I don't think I've ever seen anybody fail on that, fortunately. So, but anyway, that's a little background for you. Thank you.
So at this point, board staff is presenting this issue to the board for consideration and feedback. If the board wanted to take action, they could direct staff to potentially put together a proposed regulatory language to be considered for initiation and a rulemaking at a future meeting.
We have a
Question.
Ms. Burton moving, and we have a
I'll
comment
second.
from Dr. Chan.
So in the proposal for remedial education, after that's complete and assume it's successful, do they have to re-evaluate where they are? In other words, go through the re-evaluation again?
Right, so the remediation would be in effect either prior to them being granted. So if they failed their second evaluation, and Dr. Witcher, correct me if I'm wrong, if they fail their second evaluation, that then goes to the LCP committee, and the LCP committee makes a recommendation to the board. That recommendation is either to grant a third evaluation or to deny the permit. Regardless of whichever action they take, they would need to remediate and have to pass an evaluation before they were able to have the permit again.
I have a question.
Dr. Morrow.
I'm assuming that the assessments or these evaluations for permits do not come under the jurisdiction of the Office of Professional Examination Services in the Department of Consumer Affairs. Okay. So it's not considered an examination. An assessment, I mean, it's a terminology, obviously.
It's in kind of a unique category, and the thought has crossed my mind that even though we hold a calibration, even though this program's been in existence for a long time, it would not be a bad idea to look at it. But we have so many issues, I'm kind of reluctant to go there.
You know, a question that I have regarding reducing the requirement for reassessment or reevaluation to one examiner rather than two would be, do we have any, or we could probably look at, what kind of data do we have when we've had two examiners, one passed, one failed? If we only had one examiner doing it, then they would either pass when another one might have failed them. So there's an issue there of how often do we have two examiners that disagree whether or not the candidate has passed the assessment?
We could probably go back and look at that. You know, it's been my impression that, well, certainly the cases we see in LCP are all cases where there have been two failures. And we don't see the ones there that have, you know, had a split vote. So, you know, there was a time when we tracked these a little bit more closely and looked at all the failures, whether it was one or two. And, you know, there was some variation. Sometimes we would see a split vote. More often it was unanimous and it was a pass. Like I say, you're only seeing maybe 2 or 3 failures a year, if that. So it's a very small number where you're having, you know, failures at all.
But I do, in the light of our looking at possible ways of reducing adverse events in sedation and GA, that this is a process or an area where we might be able to tighten up that area of adverse events by making sure that we are adequately assessing, especially the emergency procedures situation, which I heard you say was probably the most common area of failure as far as the permit assessment is concerned, which is probably the most common area where adverse events can go into disaster. So there's an area that we might look at from a standpoint of cleaning up our own assessment to make sure that our permit holders are meeting those requirements.
Well, that's a long-term project, and ultimately we'd like to see this go to a simulation. But the logistics of doing that, I've run those numbers and looked at what it would take. And because we have, you know, probably, we have all, you know, 1,500 permit holders, and if they renew every 5 years, you've got a pretty big number. You got to staff the simulation center, run the simulations. It's not a small undertaking. But I think there is room for continual examination of the process, and I'd be all ears if somebody has ideas how we can improve it.
Dr. Lay.
Okay, so just from my own knowledge, okay, Dr. Bruce Witcher and mentioned there are like 2 or 3 failed inspections a year. Do you have the number of how many permit holders failed twice inspections in a year? Do we have the number of the site evaluators, that are available to assist us in the site evaluations? I mean, like, I'm just trying to assess like the pool, of the, of evaluators. And then when it comes to, I guess there's a, Dr. Morrow mentioned something about calibration of some sort. I believe that there is a checklist, so maybe the inspection is not as subjective, as like the exams.
Yeah,
because
I can go
yeah.
over this in detail but it would take a lot of time to do this. We track the numbers of evaluators that are available. The problem is,
How many do we have?
for general anesthesia, we currently have 287, conscious sedation 151, MGA 19. That was as the end of last year, and the number fluctuates. I think there may be a more current number in here, but I just have that. There is a calibration
Right.
that all the evaluators have to do beforehand.
Okay.
That's available as an online course. They are supposed to be paired up, an experienced evaluator with a less experienced one. And so, there's going to have to be a little more calibration if somebody's really new. As far as double failures, yeah, we can definitely track that. I don't have a number right now. I know we see them come through LCP committee, and I think in the last year there's maybe been 2 or 3. It isn't a high, it's low single digits. But again, as Dr. Morrow said, this is our first line of defense. Just so you know, California has one of the most established programs. It's been in existence longer in California than anywhere else. It is the national model. Many states, it's voluntary or it's run by the state association. It's not run by the board. It takes a lot of resources to do this. That's one reason we had to raise the fee. But that doesn't mean there can't be improvements, and I'm always, cognizant of ways maybe that could be done.
Additional comments from the board?
Some of the issues around the pool are our examiners are aging out, essentially. So there was a generation of people that really volunteered time more freely than people can now. And so we're finding that the examiners who have worked for us for many, many years are passing away, or health issues don't allow them to participate anymore. So we'll have to figure out a way to recruit the younger people to be involved in this.
I think we're ready for public comment. Dr. Atchison.
Thank you. Dr. Guy Atchison. I have conscious sedation license number 4, and I've been an evaluator from the very beginning of the program. In fact, before the dental board ran the program, CDA had a voluntary program that we were part of, so I was involved in forming that. And I want to support Dr. Witcher's suggestions, and as an examiner, I feel that his suggestion of having 2 examiners for initials and 2 examiners for a retest for an initial failure, but allowing 1 examiner for the periodic reevaluations for people that have been successful before seems very reasonable and comfortable. I think having 2 examiners for the initial is extremely important, mainly to train a new examiner so that they have an idea about how to do an examination, and there are always some uncomfortable close calls where you need some judgment and experience to make a decision and you'd like to confer. And the re-examinations having two, of a previous failure, having two examiners, I think is also important to have a newer examiner as one of those to learn how to handle those situations, because many times it's a personality issue or office organization issue that you need to recognize. So it's been a great program. Dr. Witcher has the hours that he's put in and the different ways he's gone to try and recruit people is amazing. And I'm being examined personally this year, and I feel great about the whole process. I think it's fair, equitable, and really done well. The only concern I'd have with the single examiner is that it probably, my suggestion should be somebody who has no personal interaction with the person being examined, that it should be somebody, a stranger from a remote area, just so that the personal relationships don't get involved in doing that examination when you're by yourself. But I think it's a great program, and thank you, Dr. Witcher.
Good morning. Alan Felsenfeld, oral and maxillofacial surgeon, speaking as an individual. I guess Dr. Atchison's a little older than I am because I have general anesthesia permit number 8. And thank you, Guy. I want to just talk on some of the things that we've discussed this morning already, and I fully agree with Dr. Witcher's comments and Dr. Atchison's comments. I have been doing a number of these anesthesia evaluations, and while we have a pool of, and I do them for both moderate sedation as well as deep sedation and general anesthesia because I have the higher permit, as it were. We have a pool of 300-ish kind of people all the time, but I've got to tell you, to get these people to actually get and do an examination is virtually impossible. I get calls from staff all the time because I'm in an academic world and I don't run a practice. It's not quite the same, and I can get out there, and they ask if I can do an exam, and I said, okay, we'll get you a couple of dates, and then I wait, and I wait, and I wait. And I finally hear from staff, and I go, well, what happened? Well, we couldn't find a second person. And this happens. I've had a number of cases where the second person doesn't show up. Then what do? I've had a number of cases where I've never had a situation in the dozens of exams that I've given over the years where the two of us did not agree that it was a pass or a fail. So the concept of getting one person to agree does not make any sense, that there'd be a differential. I concur that the initial one could be two people, and I think Dr. Atchison's comment that a young person could come do it with an older person. I'm not aging out yet, Dr. Fisher, Ms. Fisher, sorry, but I'm getting there. The other thing is, if you think of CODA and the evaluation, and Dr. Witcher touched on this, the evaluation of full programs for training, with the exception of oral and maxillofacial surgery for reasons I don't understand, one examiner each time. I think it's a very, very good way to do it, and I think it would facilitate getting these exams done in a timely manner. I know that 5-year period disappears and it becomes 6 sometimes because you just can't get the people to do it. So anything you can do to lighten that burden, I think, will be to the benefit of the board, and given the anesthesia things that are going on, it would just be to the benefit of all of us.
Further public comment? There's a motion. I'm not sure there's a second.
I'll second. Who was that, Jen? Yes. Okay. Okay, calling the vote. Burden? Yes. Chan?
Yes.
Chappelle Ingram, yes. Lai?
Yes.
Lauren?
Yes.
Lay? McKenzie?
Yes.
Medina? Absent. Morrow?
Yes.
Olegui? Pacheco? Stewart?
Yes.
Witcher?
Yes.
You?
Yes.
Mr. President, motion passes.
Thank you. We can just move that in. All right, I believe we're moving into item 16 on Thursday, May 17th's agenda, which is an ethics training presentation by our Michael Santiago, Dental Board Legal Counsel. Michael, whatever you're comfortable doing, whatever. You want to use this and just stay here? All right.
Good morning again. Michael Santiago. I'm an attorney with DCA Legal Affairs Division. I also serve as the department's ethics officer, so part of my duties as the ethics officer is to present at the board member orientation training, which is we call BMOT, usually held 3 to 4 times a year up in Sacramento. And for today, I'm not going to go into the entire presentation that I do because that's more of a training, more of an interactive kind of presentation where you can ask more questions, we can delve deeper into the issues. So for the short amount of time that I have right now, I'm just going to go over the 4 major areas that all the board members really should be cognizant about, just so that we can avoid any potential conflicts of interest or the appearance of any conflict of interest. And those 4 areas are financial conflicts of interest, common law conflicts of interest, meaning that it's all based in case law, there are no statutes or rules. The 3rd area is incompatible work activities, and then finally we'll round it out with conflicts of interest in contracts. So let's start with the financial conflicts of interest. This is all grounded in the Political Reform Act, which is interpreted and enforced by the Fair Political Practices Commission, or the FPPC. They're also the ones who control and determine all aspects of the Form 700, which everyone here is required to fill out annually. Now, financial conflicts of interest, the Political Reform Act has the basic rule which pretty much all the other rules follow, and that's public officials can't have a financial interest in the participation or making of governmental decisions. So that's basically what you need to keep in mind. You know, there's a tremendous amount of rules, but if you just keep that in mind when you have issues that come before the board, when you see the agenda, that's what we want you to focus on, is to step back and say, hey, do you have some sort of interest, a financial interest that could be affected by that particular area, or you making a decision in that area? And it comes down to, well, how do you know if you have a financial interest? Because not all of your interests are going to lead to a potential conflict of interest being a board member for this board. So the Political Reform Act says that you have a financial interest in a decision if it's reasonably foreseeable that the decision will have a material effect on your financial background. So that's a lot there. The FPPC has a 4-step process to determine whether or not you might have a financial conflict of interest, because if you do, that would lead to disqualification on the particular issue that's before the board. And that would mean that you would have to identify the conflict, you would have to recuse yourself from the discussion and the voting, and you'd have to leave the room as well. So that's what would happen under what's called disqualification. Now, I mentioned that not all of your financial interests could be brought into this discussion of whether or not you have a financial conflict of interest. And what we're looking at are 2 general categories of your sources of finances. The first one would be any source of money or income, and it's an interest wherein the business entity, the professional association or individual is regulated by the board, or the entity offers licensing or CE courses. So that's the first category of economic interests that you have to be concerned about and that you look at. The second one are economic interests wherein the business entity has contracted with the board to provide goods or services. So when we're looking at this entire realm of whether or not you have a potential financial conflict of interest, those are the 2 basic categories we want you to look at, because those are also the 2 basic categories that you would fill the Form 700 out. So again, that Form 700 is more than just a headache for you. It's actually a tool that everyone uses to determine if there's a possible financial conflict of interest. So a lot of people have the misconception that, oh, it's every possible economic interest that I have. It's all the properties I own, any income that I'm getting from speaking engagements, from doing part-time jobs, from my regular job. So it's not everything. And it's just those 2 little categories. So if you can focus that, it makes it a little bit easier to tackle these issues about potential financial conflicts of interest. Now in BMOT, we go through a lot of the scenarios. We go through the extreme amount of exceptions that apply so that we can take you out. Maybe you'd have to report your income or the economic interest on the Form 700, but there wouldn't be any disqualification, so you could go forward. It would just be you'd have to report it, and there'd be no limit so that you wouldn't be conflicted out of participating or making that decision. So that's the financial realm in a nutshell. When we move to the common law conflict of interest, we're moving outside of the finances. So what we're focusing on are the personal relationships or your business relationships. We're looking at, do you have some sort of personal stake? Do you have an advantage or disadvantage in the decision that's before you? So if you have a disciplinary case and say it's involving someone you know and work with on a daily basis, you might go to him or her socially, you might have some sort of involvement, and it's more than just a fellow colleague. So we have to determine on a case-by-case basis what's your relationship to that person or the entity that's before the board, and we can determine whether or not you would recuse yourself from the decision-making process and the voting as well. So again, in that area, this is where it's a little bit harder. It's definitely case-by-case because, again, this is all by case law. And what's a little bit difficult is that there really isn't that much case law on the department and board members, per se. So that's why we use a lot of analogizing, to local officials in the local sector. You have your city council members because that's where the greater amount of case law is based. So we do a lot of that, comparisons, and we try to give you, some best recommendations and some guidelines for going forward. But again, what it boils down to in this area is whether or not there's some sort of an advantage for you, whether you could benefit personally from a decision, and again, it's outside the realm of finances. Moving to the third area that I'd like to touch on is the incompatible work activities. Every department within the state of California has an incompatible work activities policy, and this is rooted from the government code, which lists 6 general areas that state you have that are incompatible to your duties as a state employee or a state official. Now, some of the ones that are stated to be incompatible work activities would be if you use using your state time or facilities or supplies for private gain or for some private business. Obviously, when you're working as a board member, that's what we want you to focus on, and doing anything contrary to that would be an incompatible work activity. The one area that we see a lot and that comes up for board members most often is the area where you're performing an act knowing that the act may later be subject directly or indirectly to your control, inspection, review, audit, or enforcement. That's the big one. And what that really means is that if you're engaging in an activity and that activity later comes before the board for control, inspection, review, audit, or enforcement as a board member, then that's where it's incompatible. And if it's deemed incompatible, that means that you can't engage in that activity. So there's no recusing, there's no disqualifying. It's just a blanket, you can't do that activity. So that's why it's important if you are engaging in some outside activity, and I know board members have a lot of things going on, both volunteer and possibly paid, that you at least consult first with Karen, and then we can discuss further if, we might need to go through this analysis to determine whether or not there could be a potential incompatible work activity there. So again, there's a list of 6 general categories. It's not exhaustive, and that's why, again, this is also on a case-by-case basis that we look at it. And I also want to point out that a lot of times this comes up with your work with professional associations. You might be an officer, or if you're not, you're heavily involved with one of the committees that the professional association has. And so where it gets kind of dicey is if somehow that issue is coming before the board, or that the industry association is regulated, or in some manner that we have to go deeper and kind of look more at the facts rather than just the superficial level. So that's the incompatible work activities, and let's move lastly into conflicts of interest pertaining to contracts. This one is I like to say it's a simple area, but it's also a complex one. And that's because the rule is pretty easy. If you have a financial interest in a contract that's before the board, either for consideration or approval, you can't, number one, engage in any decision making, and number two, that contract can't go before the board at all for discussion or consideration. The only way that the board could consider a contract wherein you have a financial interest would be as if you resigned from the board. So there's no great exception or overarching exception here. Other than that, there are smaller, minute exceptions which would be subject to the determination of the FPPC because they are the ones who interpret and enforce this body of law. And again, the exceptions that would apply are highly technical, and we would want to have the FPPC review it to see if you do fall into one of those exceptions, where you could have the board consider the contract wherein you would either recuse yourself or you would just have to simply state what interest you have, but you could also participate. So that's why I think that area, it doesn't come up a lot, but it is, it can be tricky if you do happen to have that situation. And as like I said, we go over all of these areas in depth at BMOT. I also encourage you, if you have any questions pertaining to your individual situation, to please contact me. I'm always available to answer any questions. And if there's any other questions from the board right now, I can take those. Yes?
One of the things that I always struggle with is the financial part of the stocks, and I would think that that probably would be an issue for all board members. And it's things like those businesses that may do business with the state. And the example that I would give would be Apple. And I just report it, and nobody has said not to report it, because some of it you wouldn't know. You really wouldn't know who provides all the supplies or that kind of thing. Is there any kind of general advice that you give on that?
Well, I know that does come up a lot, and usually, generally speaking, the FPPC, when they give guidance on whether or not you should disclose on the Form 700, they're very cautious, and they say, well, if you're in doubt, just go ahead and report it, because there's no harm in over-reporting. If it comes out later, you reported it, and we look at it, there's no conflict, then that's fine. Where it gets, a little bit more, should I disclose it or not, it's better to over-disclose. That's what they would say. But again, when you're filling out the Form 700 and looking at your economic interests, you want to look at those interests through the lens of those two disclosure categories that I was talking about. Does the entity that you're receiving an economic interest does it do business with the board? Are they contracting for goods or services with the board? So we're not looking at the state so much as the board itself. That's that disclosure category. And the other one is the source of your economic interest, are they regulated in any manner by the board, directly or indirectly? That's what we're looking at, those two areas. So it's safe to say you could be okay by not, if you're talking about Apple specifically and owning stock in some corporation, if it doesn't meet those two disclosure categories, it falls outside the realm, and therefore you're not required to report it. So that's generally how we speak. If you do have a concern about specific interests or specific stocks in specific corporations, you can always go directly to the FPPC and request either informal or written guidance, and they will tell you specifically, based on all the facts you gave us, you have to or you don't have to report it on the Form 700.
Dr. Witcher.
Yeah, I think one point that has caused me a lot of reflection is we are members of a profession which we regulate, and we derive income from that profession. And so I believe that falls outside of economic interest, even though it isn't. Is that correct?
Right. Well, your direct means of employment, for practicing dentistry, if you have your solo or you're working for someone else, that's outside the scope of what we're looking at. But then when it turns to other kinds of, let's say, speaking engagements, things of that nature, that's where we have to delve a little bit deeper, because oftentimes it's more than just getting, what could be termed income from that, but there might be travel payments involved as well. So that's where we have to look at all those aspects. But the primary source of your income, normally it's outside the scope.
I believe our board member manual has some specifics in it related to speaking engagements and travel expenses and things like that. So you can always look to that, or of course, ask Karen or Michael.
Ask Michael.
Okay, thank you.
Michael, thank you. Great job. Appreciate it. I think at this time, we'll take a 15-minute break and resume in that amount of minutes. Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and call this meeting back to order, please. And we're on item 17, our executive officer's report.
Good morning. My name is Karen Fisher, and I'm the Executive Officer of the Dental Board. I'm going to start the report with our vacancies and our staffing. So pretty much the information is pretty concise here. We're nearly, right when we nearly get fully staffed, you'll see it says Executive Office currently fully staffed. Well, not now, because Allison is moving on, so we are recruiting for that position. You get so close and you get everything just, this is life, so we're going to be dealing with it. So we will be recruiting for journey level analyst to do our legislation and regulation. The recruitment process takes some time, so we're hoping to try to get interviews done and fill that position as quickly as we can. The licensing unit is fully staffed. Bernal Vaba has been doing a fabulous job of coordinating all the analysts and cross-training them. This is something that we've been working toward for a number of years, so all the analysts in the unit essentially process all the applications. They're familiar with all the pathways, and that's working out well. Very pleased. The dental assisting program, there is one vacancy. We have a limited term staff manager that we're in the process of recruiting. I believe interviews are going to be held next week. And we're hoping to fill that vacancy. What we're doing with a limited term position, essentially, we have the authority to have limited term positions, and the purpose of that is to build our workforce data, essentially, to then take forward for a formal approval of a position, and that goes through the budget change proposal. So for the next 2 years, our hope is that we'll be developing statistics that will show that we certainly need a program manager over the dental assisting program. Our enforcement division, complaint and compliance, we have one vacancy. Our discipline coordination unit, which is Jocelyn is a member of, as is Adrian Miller and Nellie Forget. That's fully staffed. We have one vacancy in the Sacramento office, and that is because our inspector 2 weeks ago received a promotion at another agency and has moved on, so we will be recruiting for the inspector position in Sacramento. The Orange office, we have our enforcement office down here in Orange. There is one vacancy. Interviews were conducted for the investigator position this week, and we are hopefully going to be hiring in that position soon. Recently, let's see. So I think that concludes pretty much our staffing report. I just wanted to take time at this time to say that somebody who's very near and dear to us is going on to the next chapter of his life, and Lou is our videographer, and he has been really a stellar part of our team. He's retiring, so we can't feel too bad that he's leaving because he's been in state service for how many years? 10 years, and he's moving on to the next chapter in his life. We're not sure whether he's going to be able to cover our meeting in August, so at this time I wanted to acknowledge you, Lou, and say best wishes, and we hope to see you in August, but in the event that we don't, you've been marvelous, and we really appreciate the work that you've put in, so thank you. I get emotional. I don't have any hormones left, so. Okay, so the next, I'm going to go to B, which is the update on the Substance Abuse Coordination Committee in response to SB 796. So The dental board participated in the development of uniform standards relating to licensees who are drug or alcohol abusers. And there's a lengthy history of how this came about. The medical board many years ago had a diversion program, and it was brought to light that it wasn't working well, and so it put essentially all healing arts boards under the light of review. And so in response to getting a firmer grip on how to essentially deal with licensees who are drug and alcohol abusers, the uniform standards was developed. The legislature was very much behind this. And so uniform standards do exist within statute. Now, there are many board members that are new and don't recall the discussions that the board had years ago with how we were going to implement uniform standards and whether or not the board was in some way giving up discretion. And I'm not going to go through that at this point to step through those or explain those hurdles that we went through, but we do incorporate uniform standards as a separate entity to our disciplinary standards. So all of this now is coming back to the legislature in SB 796 has asked the director of the department to reconvene this Substance Abuse Coordination Committee. The committee consists of the executive officers at DCA, and the purpose or the mission of reconvening this committee is primarily to look at standard number 4, uniform standard number 4, which deals with the number of tests and the testing procedures that the participants in either probation or diversion have to comply with. And so we had our first meeting of the Substance Abuse Coordination Committee, and perhaps Patrick will also expand on this when he speaks later. So we'll be looking to meet probably a couple of more times to determine whether any changes need to be made to this standard number 4 or not. And that report has to be submitted to the legislature essentially by the end of the year. The directors has been charged with submitting that report. Now, if the committee determines that changes need to be made, those changes don't need to be solidified by the end of the year, just notification to the legislature that, yes, changes will need to be made to uniform standards. There's been some concern that the number of required testing procedures may be too high, and so this coordinating committee will be looking at all aspects of uniform standards number 4, and I'll be reporting back to the board on how that goes. Number C is dealing with our
Could I just make a comment on this SB 796 and the SACC? DCA does have a section on their website that addresses this. And I think there's a notice of a meeting and some publications on there. And I know nobody is looking for a lot of extra assignments, but there's some really good papers on drug and alcohol testing there and how that is done. And since we see so much of it, it's really useful background. And I would say, and the articles on there are evidence-based. They're extremely good articles, very factual. They speak to why you do testing, what is the goal of testing, how is testing done. And I think it's really good to do an examination of the frequency and what you're looking for in the way of a yield on that. And there's somewhere in those articles, I think, there would be some good recommendations as how we could maintain an effective program and yet not have it overly burdensome. So I think there's some good work going on there. I mean, when this went through before, I think that it was kind of a lot of pressure to get it done, and maybe now we can go back and re-examine some of the details. So there's a good resource there for you if you're interested.
Thank you, Dr. Witcher. But because you do have a hefty assignment, you really don't have to worry about this at this time, because all we're doing this year is determining whether or not there will be changes to number 4. We also have a diversion evaluation committee, and those members are appointed by the board, and they're into they're into the weeds with this. I mean, they know the program, they are watching the changes. We'll take recommendations from them. And so if any changes are made, it would be down the line, and we would be making those to our regulatory package. So there'll be plenty of time for board members to acquaint themselves with the situation. We will bring it down to more of a summary level for you. Indeed, it will be coming, but it's not immediately coming, so we have some time. I was going on to item C regarding the DCA licensing and enforcement performance measure work groups. So the department has established these work groups now, and they're encouraging all boards to participate. The main purpose is essentially to get input from all the boards on their processes relating to licensing and enforcement. And so it started up this month. Every other month will be licensing, and then filled in by the other months by enforcement. So we have staff that are attending these workshops, and hopefully at the end of this, we'll come up with best practices for all the boards and bureaus within DCA. And Patrick may be speaking to this too, and so I'm going to leave it short so that you can, you know, if they hear it more than once, sometimes it sticks, so that's good. Okay. Item number D is relating to our diversion program contract. So Maximus has been the company that essentially has been running our diversion program. In my personal opinion, they've done an excellent job. They do incorporate all the uniform standards. Our diversion program has slipped in the number of people that are in the program. I've been told that years ago we had as high a number as 85. We're down to between 13 and 15 now. So the contract will be up soon, so the diversion program managers are meeting now to put together the request for proposals. It has to go out for a bid. So it also is a pretty lengthy process, but I'll be reporting to you on the future. This is just recently kicked off, and so I'll be reporting back on that issue. Item number E was the establishment of the Dental Public Health Training and Technical Assistance Center. So we recently received notification from the California Dental Director that the University of California, San Francisco, and the Department of Public Health have established a Dental Public Health Training and Technical Assistance Center. So this item is just for your information. We've included essentially a link to the oral health plan. We reported on that at the last meeting and also made that available to board members and stakeholders who were interested. The Breeze maintenance contract is coming to an end, and what that means is that Accenture, who has been the vendor that essentially the department has used to convert all of us over into the Breeze program. The Accenture their maintenance contract is coming to an end. And we haven't determined yet whether that's good news or bad news. There's some challenges that may be coming. We're hopeful that we'll see that the Breeze costs are going to be leveling out. And the hope is that the DCA Office of Information Services staff are trained up and will be able to essentially take over the duties of the current vendor. And so it's interesting because we as the dental board or we as DCA don't own the product. We just utilize the product, and so there's some technical issues that have arisen in terms of who can make what they call core changes to the product. What we will probably be looking at is for issues that come up, and there are constant issues coming up, we will do what we call workarounds, and hopefully that the DCA staff will be able to assist us in that. That's where they're trying to move. So that contract will be coming to an end soon. Regarding the American Association of Dental Boards meetings, I understand that Dr. Witcher attended that meeting, and he's agreed to give us a short report on what happened there.
Yes, this is, the American Association of Dental Boards is an association of state dental boards from around the country. They basically have 2 meetings a year, the annual meeting, which is usually held in conjunction with the ADA meeting. It won't be in Hawaii this year, though, so it's not a good trip to Hawaii. They're having it in Chicago. And then they have the spring meeting, which I attended, and also Dr. Felsenfeld and Mary ran into them there. But again, I attended this at my own expense because the state doesn't pay for out-of-state travel. It was well attended. We have the president of ADB here, Dr. Magnuson, and he presided over the opening ceremony, and we heard presentations from him, and also Joseph Crowley, president of the ADA, the executive director of the ADB, and a series of presentations, one of which was by the chairman of ADIA, chairman of the board, Monty McNeil, and heard presentations on corporate dentistry, silver-diamine fluoride, advocacy, shaping the future of the profession, and various other topics of interest to board members. I think the most interesting one I thought was the attorney update. There were a number of state board attorneys from various boards around the country gave a presentation on specialty recognition, minimum competency, standard of care, and teledentistry. So, there were some good topics. And, I think the thing that I took away is there's a lot of common issues across the country. California kind of leads the pack a little bit, and some of the things that were being discussed there we had cross our desk previously. Nevertheless, it's always interesting to hear. You have to remember there's a tremendous spectrum of state boards, and it's really useful to go to these and see. Some of them are very small, and some of them the dentists are more directly involved with doing hearings and enforcement. Sometimes their budgets are very limited on some of the smaller states. As you can imagine, California is sort of this monster by comparison in terms of a large staff and a large budget. But I would maybe encourage you the next time you're at an ADA meeting to stop in and attend one of the sessions. And it's an interesting, it's a useful experience to kind of round that out, along with other things like participating in licensing exams and so on. So that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Witcher. I'm on item number H now on my report, Sexual Harassment Prevention Training Compliance Update. The Dental Board is a superstar. We had 100% compliance. Thank you, board members, for making sure you got your training done last year. Apparently, everybody was not able to meet that goal, so we were designated by the department as a superstar because we did. As you know, sexual harassment prevention training is a required 2-hour training every 2 years. The mandatory year is the odd year. So while our new board members are required to take that this year, unfortunately, they'll have to take it again next year in order to get into the cycle. But it's valuable training. It's essentially across California lines with more and more issues cropping up regarding sexual harassment. I think that the department certainly has been on board with sexual harassment prevention training for a very long time. And so it is valuable training. So thanks to you all for completing that. At a prior meeting, we were asked by different stakeholders to bring back information regarding the foreign dental school we had at the time, which was University de la Salle in Mexico. Some of the stakeholder groups had questions specifically about how many graduates have actually come out of the program and where are they being utilized. Well, we can only go by what their address of record is, and so we've essentially given you the information here how many graduates there have been, About 267 applications were received. The question was how many didn't meet the qualifications, if you will, for the application process, and there were about 10 that didn't proceed with the process. So at any point within the application process, if deficiencies aren't completed, then the application is abandoned. So essentially, most of the people who fulfilled all of the people that fulfilled all of the requirements were licensed. So we've broken it down here to essentially just afford the people that had asked that question with this information. Getting back to where they're actually practicing and why the legislation came about in the first place, the intention of the legislation was that they would be enhancing the workforce in underserved areas and be providing cultural information and be able to deal with cultural differences and be able to speak the language. However, we don't have any authority to require them to be in those areas working, and we can't determine how many are actually working in underserved areas because we can only use their address of record at this point. And you can see some are actually working in other states at this point. That concludes my report, and it looks like we have public comment. Any board?
Any board comment? Seeing none? Public comment. Dr. Atchison.
Hi, Dr. Guy Atchison, Academy of General Dentistry. I want to say a huge thank you, Karen, and the board, because I know how busy you are, but to be able to generate this report, which my members, the Academy of General Dentistry, and so many dentists wanted to know what the results of these programs are that were designed to encourage culturally sensitive dentists to come in and hopefully help with access to care in underserved areas in the state. And with the heavy lift that it took to do a site visit and do this unprecedented approval of a foreign school, and now University of Moldova, #2, I can't wait to see the statistics on that. I want to say thank you, because I know how much work that was. And I want to say thank you to Mary, because she actually helped bring my questions to the board at a meeting that I couldn't attend. So, and it is kind of gratifying. I was looking at the counties here, and some of the really impacted counties like Butte, Colusa, Fresno, Imperial, Kern, San Joaquin, Stanislaus, Tulare. You know, so there has been some penetration into some of these most impacted areas, although still nobody in Alpine County. It's such a beautiful place. I don't know why. But anyway, thank you on behalf of the Academy of General Dentistry and all the dentists in California. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further public comment, I think we're ready for item number 18, report on the Dental Hygiene Committee of California.
Morning, Mr. President, board members, and staff. I'm Anthony Lum. I'm the Executive Officer of the Dental Hygiene Committee, and I want to thank you for this opportunity to come before you to inform you of our activities since our last meeting. Unfortunately, my president, Susan Good, apologizes for not being here. She had a prior work commitment that she couldn't break, so you get me instead. The committee continues its busy schedule with the following. The committee conducted its spring meetings in April in San Diego, where President Stewart and Executive Officer Fisher provided an update on dental board activities. In brief, it was a meeting where the committee decided the following. We approved the Joint Infection Control Subcommittee's draft of the amendments to California Code of Regulations, Section 1005, pertaining to infection control. I do want to thank Dr. Lay and one of our members, Noel Kelsch, and the dental board staff that worked on these amendments and all the efforts that went into it. I also want to thank you all for forwarding the language today, because I don't want my committee to be holding up anything, but we're not meeting until November, so I'm glad you guys decided to move the language forward. We also had discussions on stakeholder issues from particularly educators of the dental hygiene programs that needed clarification as they requested to agendize issues on local anesthesia injections, particularly the numbers and type of injections, the nitrous oxide and oxygen administration education, and radiography education. The committee decided to form a task force to review and research these issues and present its recommendations back to the committee at a future meeting. This is so we can hopefully resolve these issues for our stakeholders and come to some resolutions on how we proceed forward. We reviewed legislation and provided positions on bills in the current session. We determined to proceed with the new diversion contract, especially with the new cannabis laws that are in place and their unknown effects on the profession. Our contract currently is structured as such where the committee actually subsidizes our participants, and unfortunately with our small budget that we have, we can't afford to do that. So it's good timing that this new contract is coming into place, and we're going to restructure our contract so that way the participants unfortunately will have to bear the full cost of the program. The managers for the diversion programs did meet last week to start reviewing the request for proposal. We're actually reviewing the last request for proposal to see if we can mimic any parallels to the new contract. And so the process has just started, like Karen said, and we'll be moving forward with that new contract. We also have, we've also are in discussions with the Office of Professional Examination Services for occupational analysis, and we have overdue examination, what do they call that? Examination review for exam development for our law and ethics exam. So we'll be working with the OPES over the next year or two. Excuse me just a minute. This next item, I'm really glad to report. We are 95% of the way through our sunset review. And in knowing a year ago at this time, we were in your shoes and looking forward to sunset review. I'm glad all the work is mostly behind us, and I wish you well in your sunset review. We actually had our hearing in February, and minimal issues were identified from the committee, which is really good. Our sunset bill, SB 1482, was heard before the Senate Business Professions and Economic Development Committee in April, where it passed on a 9-0 vote. The bill changes the committee to a board, removes the dental board's jurisdiction language from statute, except for scope of practice issues, and provides additional provisions for the committee to continue its oversight of the dental hygiene educational programs, such as placing a program on probation or issuing citation and fines to programs deficient of the law. The next issue is vacancies for my committee. We've had ongoing three vacant positions, and I'm glad to report that our probation monitor position, the individual accepted a conditional hire, so I'm that close to filling one. The second one, we're in the same boat as you. Our legislative and regulatory analyst left in the fall of last year, and because of sunset workload and everything, I had to delay in trying to fill that position. But we did advertise for it over the last month, and I will be starting to review the applications for that position and hopefully fill it soon. We got a lot of work to do.
Sarah, could you beat him to it, and can we,
No.
can we kind of steal some of the people he's looking at?
No.
We're much faster.
Yeah.
You can review the stuff after I review it.
Oh, okay.
Good suggestion, though. The last position is to fill my prior position, the Assistant Executive Officer. So I will be finalizing the documents on that, and we'll be advertising for that position soon. The last issue is the ongoing review of the dental hygiene educational programs. We're continuing our oversight of the educational programs and discover that many have minor deficiencies of the law and are willing to correct them after we've identified them. Items such as proper infection control, appropriate documentation, or other administrative discoveries are the most profound issues. To date, we've reviewed and conducted 9 site visits, or I should say we've reviewed 9 individual schools. We've conducted multiple site visits on many of them, just to ensure that they're complying with the law and following what they have recommended as far as compliance is concerned. That basically concludes my report, and do you have any questions?
How many people do you have in diversion?
In diversion, we have 0 right now.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to be looking into moving more individuals into diversion because we do receive a lot of individuals that have alcohol and substance abuse issues. However, because of the way the contract is currently created, we can't afford to subsidize those individuals. When we had an individual, I believe it was when I first got on with the committee around 2012, 13. At that time, we were using the dental board's contract for diversion, and we had to pay thousands of dollars for that individual. It was just one individual, but it was thousands of dollars that came out of our budget to pay for that person to be in that program. So I'm going to be working hard to restructure the contract.
Tony, I have one question.
Yeah.
DHCC is going to be eventually trying to become a board. How is that going to affect our communications between our dental board and your hygiene board?
It won't at all. We have a great relationship. It's a title change, but it's one that gives us the perception of more autonomy. We're already doing all of the functions that a board does, and so we wanted to be recognized as such. Out in the community and stakeholders that have called me personally, they're still a bit confused as far as whether we're still under the purview of the dental board or whether we are our own independent agency. And so by changing our nomenclature to a board, it'll help clarify that.
Tony, I think you mentioned that the one area that the Dental Board of California has some control over, or if that's the right word even, you can correct me, is a scope of practice. Could you kind of tell us your thoughts in terms of where that particular subject sits in terms of your autonomy or our relationship, and when it relates to scope of practice?
Sure. In the law, it states that the Dental Hygiene Committee, if we're requesting a change of scope, we bring it before the dental board for review and recommendation. So that's the items that we would bring before you, because in working in a dental team, of course, we would want your input as far as any potential scope of practice requests. And so that's what we would bring before you for a recommendation.
Thank you. Any further board questions? Public comment? Thank you, Tony.
Thank you very much.
Patrick, welcome. Patrick Lay will be giving us a report on the Department of Consumer Affairs staffing and activities.
Good morning. President Stewart, Vice President Burton, Executive Officer Fisher, members of the board. First of all, thank you so much for allowing this opportunity for the department to provide an update to you all. My name is Patrick Lay. I am the Assistant Deputy Director for Board and Bureau Services at the Department of Consumer Affairs. I've been on the job for a whopping 6 months, which I'm told translates into 10 years in department time. So happy to have survived this long and to have this opportunity to continue working with you. I work under Deputy Director Christopher Castrillo, who attended your last board meeting, and between him and myself, our job is to support this board in whatever capacity we can. A little bit about myself, if I may. Prior to joining the department, I was the Assistant Chief of External Affairs at Covered California, the state's health benefit exchange, where I helped implement the Affordable Care Act since it opened its door in 2013. And prior to that, I worked in the California State Assembly, where I worked on issues related to the judiciary and Veterans Affairs. On a side note, I want to say that this is an excellent location for a board meeting. We're in Orange County, a few miles away from the greatest university in the world, the University of California, Irvine, which may or may not be my alma mater. Go Anteaters. And I also want to welcome your four newest board members, Dr. Laren, Dr. Yu, Ms. Olagi, and Ms. Pacheco. Welcome to the DCA family. We're very excited to have you on board. So with that, I'm going to start my update, which I'm going to keep relatively short. The first one is a personnel update. A few months ago, the department welcomed a new Deputy Director for Legislative Affairs, Mr. Dennis Cuevas Romero. We're incredibly thrilled to have him on the DCA team. Before coming to the department, Mr. Cuevas Romero was the Government Relations Director at the American Heart Association since 2016, and prior to that, he was the Legislative Associate at the Hernandez Strategy Group from 2013 to 2016. We are incredibly thrilled to have him on board. If there are any questions related to legislation, feel free to reach out to him or members of the DCA Leg team. The next update is regarding the director's quarterly meeting. This past April 30th, the department held its second 2018 director's quarterly meeting with board executive officers and bureau chiefs. As usual, these quarterly meetings are an opportunity to ensure that Director Grafilo is available to you to hear important issues facing the department and its boards and bureaus. At this last meeting, we're also honored to be joined by Agency Secretary Podesta, where we're able to engage in critical topics relevant to the department. My next update, which Executive Officer Fisher mentioned, is regarding the licensing and enforcement work group. On April 10th, the department hosted its first licensing and enforcement work group meeting with over 60 board and bureau staff in attendance. We believe this was a productive first meeting that will help the department establish licensing and enforcement best practices and standards. The department will continue on this track with follow-up monthly meetings, specifically focused on one track related to enforcement and another track related to licensing, which will help the department narrow down some recommendations and collaborations with the boards and bureaus as it relates to the various performance standards that the boards are using. My next update is regarding DCA leadership training. As you know, the department Future Leadership Development Program and its inaugural cohort graduated last March. 12 individuals completed DCA's 8-month leadership program, participating in special leadership exercises, working on special projects, and developing new working relationships, and meeting with several executives who are sharing career advice. Be on the lookout for more communications from our SOLID team for more information on the next cohort. Talking about SOLID, which for the new board members, SOLID is the training arm of the department. SOLID now offers additional training and team building specifically geared towards board members, committee members, and executive level board and bureau staff. These courses are designed to improve interaction and facilitate cohesiveness within groups, provide a safe environment for communication, and build positive relationships in the workplace. Board members and executives can choose a customized series of great course topics, including conflict styles, true colors, going from good to great, leadership styles, and working with difficult people. If you are interested in scheduling a training session, feel free to reach out to any members of the Board and Bureau Services team or contacting SOLID directly. My next update is, as mentioned, related to the Substance Abuse Coordination Committee. This past April 23rd, the department reconvened the Substance Abuse Coordination Committee. Per Senate Bill 796, the committee has been tasked with examining Uniform Standard Number 4 related to drug testing standard for substance abusing licensees that are in a diversion program or in programs that have adopted the uniform standards. Uniform Standard Number 4 include a variety of topics, including testing frequency schedule, technology used for testing, and the procedures for testing. The committee is tasked to determine if the existing criteria needs to be updated based on recent development in testing, research, and technology, and is also tasked to report to the legislature by January 1st of 2019. Per statute, the committee is made up of the Healing Arts Board's executive officers, a designate from the Department of Healthcare Services, and is chaired by the director of the Department of Consumer Affairs. At this last meeting, The department used an opportunity to bring all of the executive officers up to speed on the issue, covered a number of topics, including an overview of the responsibilities of the Substance Abuse Coordination Committee, an overview of Uniform Standard Number 4, core philosophies behind diversion, and as well presentations on emerging new technologies relating to testing standards. It was a good first meeting to kind of set the tone and touch base about the responsibilities. And at this last meeting, the committee determined to collect more information and expert testimony on various topics, including other drug testing technology that may be used by the various boards and bureaus, contracted vendors that are currently in use by the department, and other expert testimonies related to more efficient testing frequency schedules. The department is working to schedule an upcoming meeting, which we expect to be in June, and more information will be available soon. Dr. Witcher, thank you so much for shouting out to our website. We did create a specific page to record all of the activities of the committee, where we will post items such as meeting notices, as well all of the materials that we use for the meetings, which included academic papers and research from the experts that attended our last meeting. If folks are interested to check the page out, it is www.dca.ca.gov/enforcement/SACC. And my last update is regarding the required board member training. Very relevant for our new board members. Dates for the 2018 Board Member Orientation Training, or BMOT, have been set. The next 3 trainings will be on June 6th, September 18th, and December 5th. This is a one-day training in Sacramento, which details the important functions and responsibilities of board members. And as mentioned, there is a piece on the regulatory rulemaking process, and also Council Santiago mentioned there is a piece on ethics and compliance. BMOT is required within 1 year of appointment and reappointment to a board. If you'd like to attend one of these trainings, again, feel free to reach out to any members of the Board and Bureau Services team or contacting Solid directly. As always, if the department can be helpful to you, feel free to reach out. This concludes my update. As a note of personal privilege, while I've been at the department for only a short time, it's been an incredible privilege to be able to work with you, work with staff, and learn every day about the incredible work that you do protecting California patients and California consumers. Thank you for having me today.
Patrick, thank you for that update. You know, and I will admit that before I went to the last board orientation training, I was thinking to myself, you know, I've been on this board for 4 years, and I'm going through another orientation training and taking a day out of my life. And I'm repeating myself now, but that day was very instructive. It was very helpful, and I'm very excited for our new members to look forward to that. And so thank you for that. Any questions of the board? Yvette.
Not a question, but a comment. One of the things, and this is for our new members too, and that is to probably take it sooner rather than later. Because once you take it, you'll be able to understand what is actually going on the dental board. But it's I really like this training, as you can attest to, Dr. Stewart. It is more comprehensive than it has been in the past. I took it last year, and it was very good. It was overhauled. It's 2.0 or 3.0 maybe, but I would encourage you to take it sooner rather than later. Keep that in mind.
Thank you. Dr. Chan.
I took the BMOT the same time as Yvette did, and it's one thing to see the terms and try to see how things work, and you're not sure. You're really not sure of what's being said, and you try to ask, but then there's too many moving parts. But like with Yvette, once you see the bigger picture of how things work, you really understand how things work. So yes, sooner than later, you become a better decision maker once you see how those pieces come together.
Karen?
I just wanted to let the board know, too, that the new members were very gracious in scheduling time with me before our board meeting, so they came to Sacramento. And I tried to walk them through a mini orientation, specifically on issues that are going to be affecting the board. And so I explained to them that essentially the BMOT training will be broader. There will be other people from other boards there. And so we did take up your suggestion, Yvette, that we actually use mentors for the new board members. So our new board members have all been assigned a seasoned member to walk them through certain things. And so right now, their mentors are sitting next to them in the meetings to try to answer any questions that may come up. We will sort of evaluate that as we go along and see how that works. But we thought that we'd afford that opportunity based on your recommendation. I recall when you came on the board, Yvette was one of the few board members that before she agreed to the appointment, called me and said, "How much work is it?" And I said, "I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's a lot of work." And despite that, she took on the appointment and is in her second term and has really jumped in and participated as a public member. That's awesome. So thank you for that, and thank you for the recommendation to try this mentorship. I also wanted to make one more comment about Patrick's, if you want to sign up for any training or anything, we typically are asking board members to come through us so that we can track that. You are welcome to contact the department directly, but they have 39 boards or so that they deal with, and so we just want to make sure that your needs are met, so we can help meet your needs if you contact us directly. Feel free to call me anytime, Sarah anytime, Jerry anytime. We will make ourselves available to assist you.
I have one comment. I have one comment as well. On the website, after you do the required training, you're supposed to print up that certificate. A lot of times they say just to email it, but always make a copy for Jerry, because she will always say you didn't take it, and make sure I need the copy, and no, I didn't see it. So even though it says just you're done, make 2 copies.
Additional comments?
I just want to make a big thank you to Karen and for the orientation program. It's really helpful. And then she took almost a half-day time of her time to help us out. And also the mentor assignment is excellent. Yeah. Thank you.
Patrick, thank you for being with us. We know you're there to support us, and we feel that, and we understand that, and that brings us comfort. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we're moving on to item number 20. Discussion and possible action regarding the renewal of the board's approval of the University of De La Salle Bahia School of Dentistry.
You have in your packets the just background information. De La Salle has had a good working relationship with the board for a number of years, and they are currently going through the renewal process that occurs every 7 years. The material they submitted was superbly presented, and I must say, based on the previous renewal application, they're worlds apart. I mean, everything was easy to read. It was very organized. It was a pleasure to see. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to the subcommittee that reviewed the application. At this point, we're still in process. There were a few things that were additional information was requested, but Dr. Lay and Dr. Morrow were the subcommittee, and I'd like to just hand it over to you, see if you had any more comments to make at this time.
I'll just say something really quick, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Morrow. I do want to thank the school for the renewal application. It is so much easier. You have made our job so much easier, and we really appreciate that. So I think we're almost there, almost. Anyway, just want to thank you, and thank you for being here. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Morrow.
Thanks. And I also want to compliment you on the quality of your submission, your application. It was in order, it was neat, it was to the point, well-bound volumes, and everything was in English. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. My Spanish is limited, but I appreciated that it was in English and well organized. I know, as Karen said, we've had a long-standing relationship with your university and your school, and it's a pleasure to be able to see you again and to reestablish some relationships and some acquaintances. In our binder there is a copy of a letter that was written to Dr. Estrada, who is the dean of the school. That was on April 25th of this year. Following receipt of the application materials, they were sent to both Dr. Lay and I independently. We independently reviewed them completely without consulting with each other. And then we scheduled a meeting at the board's office in Sacramento, where we met with our executive officer and staff, and Dr. Lay and I reviewed the application and reviewed our concerns and maybe some of our suggestions. And as a result of that, this letter identifies 2 requests that we had for additional documentation. One of those requests was for documentation to support compliance with competencies, which is something that we require as far as our assessment is concerned. And again, a random sample of students submitting documentation of the forms used for assessment of competency for the 19 competencies that the school identified. And as previously, we mentioned that in our regulations, we have identified 14 competencies. And so now we're saying, why are we saying 19 competencies? The school identified 19 competencies. So what we're asking of the school to do is to document support that their graduates were in fact competent in those 19 competencies, which exceeded the 14, that we have. However, buried in some competencies are multiple competencies, okay? Because just as an example, one of our competencies is the achievement of local anesthesia and pain management, okay? Multiple competencies, such as a competency in oral surgery, a competency in direct restorations, a competency in indirect restorations requires local anesthesia and pain management. So buried in that competency is also a competency in anesthesia and pain management. So we have to look at the fact that even though we've identified a specific number of competencies, those competencies can be repeated a number of times in different procedures. So, and in addition to the request for documentation to support compliance with those competencies, we also noted that the school standard is that their curriculum, let me back up a minute. One of the dental board's educational standards is that the curriculum must be reviewed on an ongoing basis. In other words, we want to make sure that the institution has a currently valid curriculum, that it isn't outdated, that they are teaching current principles and standards as far as the practice of dentistry is concerned in the United States. So the school identified that their curriculum review policy was every 3 to 5 years. The curriculum management plan that was presented to us for review, the most recent update on that plan was 2007, which was more than 3 to 5 years. So we requested that we be submitted an up-to-date review of their curriculum management plan. So those are the two items that the subcommittee is requesting that we receive in addition to your previous supplement for our assessment of your application for reapproval.
Dr. Morrow, I understand that the documentation has been submitted to us. We received it through an email on Tuesday. I didn't have the opportunity to pass it on or look at it because we were traveling.
Okay.
So subcommittee will be receiving that.
Great, fantastic, thank you. And thank you very much for coming and meeting with us today. Good to see you. Give my regards to your colleagues in Leon and your students. And we are happy to work with you as partners in providing good qualified dental practitioners for the patients in California.
I would want to recognize Missy Johnson, who's the representative here in California for the school. If you'd like to introduce the people you have with you today, I understand Dr. Triano wants to say a few things.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Fisher, and thank you very much to Drs. Morrow and Lay, and obviously thank you very much to the entire board. As Ms. Fisher mentioned, we do have some representatives from the university with us here today who would like to make a couple of remarks, and Dr. Triana is right here.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be here with you. Dear Mr. President, Dr. Thomas Stewart, dear Executive Officer, Mrs. Karen Fisher, honorable members of the board, we really appreciate the opportunity to share this space that allows us to express our intention to renew the approval of our Dental International program before the DBC. Our gratitude to Dr. Hong Le and Dr. Morrow for reviewing the university reapproval application and sending their comments and considerations. According to the request information, we have worked on the corresponding topics, and the answers have been sent recently with the required information. Additionally, we are working on the CODA accreditations. We had a site visit at the end of the last November, and currently we are responding to their recommendations. The response is expected by August or September of this year. We are really happy to be here with you and hear your comments. We are working very hard in our school to improve our process and will be better day after day. We try to do that. I don't know, Dr. Carvajal, let me introduce Dr. Carvajal, is our IDP coordinator, and ask him some comments about this program.
Thank you, Dr. Triana, Mr. President, Mr. Executive Officer, Karen Fisher, and members of the board. I'm going to be very brief. I'm responsible for the 2 years international dental program in De La Salle, in which we have today 30 students per year, foreign trained dentists who are looking for the DDS diploma to finally get the license to practice dentistry in California. This program has been working for the last 12 years, and until now we have a little bit more than 200 alumni, which more or less 93% of them have their licenses, and they're working in California now. Thank you.
Go ahead, sir.
No, thank you. Finally, again, we are very excited to stay here with you.
Dr. Triana Estrada, I can only echo what Dr. Lay and Dr. Morrow has said, and that it's a privilege to have you with us, and it's been a privilege to be able to work with you and your team. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Stewart.
Sorry.
I have a question for Dr. Cabajal, if I can.
Okay.
We were involved in visiting your international dentistry program 6 years ago when we did the review and the reapproval. But for the benefit of the other board members, could you explain to us what are your entrance requirements for students in your international dentistry program?
Okay, for the 2 years international dental program, sorry. Of course, the first requirement is you have to be a dentist, foreign trained dentist in your own country, first of all. Second requirements today are you have to be past the National Dental Board Examination Part 1, and you have to have a good TOEFL score, specifically IBT or CBT score. And the rest of the requirements includes if you have the National Board Part 2 passed, your possibility to be admitted in the program is, of course, higher than if you have only the Part 1. Additionally, you have to present 3 letters of recommendation and a small aside in which you express why do you want to be part of the program. Almost 100% of our applicants are doctors or dentists who were graduated at their own universities in their own countries, original countries, but they are living now in the States. A small percentage of them are living in Canada. They are applying to our programs and because they want to move to States. Once you have completed all your documentation, you have to have a practical examination, you have to pass a written examination, and you have to have an interview with the admittance committee members. Once we have the whole results of the applicants, we have to decide who are coming to our program. And I don't know if this answers your question.
That's good. Thank you very much. I think it was important for our board members to understand what those students were coming into your program already possessing. And for those of you that might not know, a TOEFL is an individual's ability to communicate in English when English is not their native language. And there's a certain score that identifies an acceptable level, that's details that we don't need to go into. But at least what they're saying is that you have the ability to communicate adequately in English, whether your native language was Spanish or whatever it might have been. The TOEFL is that measure of scale. And I think that's an important factor, especially for individuals that are planning to come to California.
I have a couple of comments about that. First of all, 100% of our professors have to pass TOEFL examination also, first. Second, official language between professor and students is English, even in the clinic. And the language between professor, student, and patients is Spanglish, because our patient doesn't speak English. Right.
Also, I just want to point out and make sure that you understand, and you mentioned that the applicants must have taken and passed Part 1 of the National Dental Board Examination, which for those of, especially our public members, the National Dental Board Examination is a standardized written examination that is required for licensure in California. And Part 1 is basic sciences, and Part 2 are clinical sciences. Now, I'm sure you are preparing for the fact that in, I think it's 2020, the National Board Examinations will no longer be Part 1 and Part 2, but there will be one examination with the clinical sciences and the basic sciences blended together. So you will not have the ability to separate the Part 1 basic sciences from the Part 2 clinical sciences. So if you continue to require that your applicants to the program, document their competency, their knowledge base. In basic sciences, you can't separate that out any longer.
Thank you, Doctor.
I believe we have some additional comments or questions, and I'm going to start with Dr. Lai.
Thank you for joining us. I have two questions. First question is, of the graduates, okay, so you have an international program and a regular DDS program. How many graduates graduate per year?
In the 2 years international program, currently we have 30 dentists per year. This is the number of students that are getting their diplomas. What was the second question?
So you also have a general DDS program too. Is that correct, or are we just talking about international? There is Donald.
Okay. We have it's the same program, but we have two different profile of students.
Okay.
One of them is for study with us all the career, and the last semester we prepare to do the exams here in California, and the second group is for 3 years IDP program, but it's the same program.
And
Then DDS is for who was attendance at our program during all the career.
Yeah, I just want to know how many you graduate per year.
Per year, we are talking about 10, 11.
Dr. Laren?
Hello, thank you for being here today. My two sons did study in Universidad de La Salle, and I can say it's an excellent school. They enjoyed it, and they passed their REB with flying colors, just like your son did. But I did want to mention, I wanted to ask Dr. Triana about the 5th year, the curriculum for the 5th year, because it changed dramatically when my younger son came out and he was taking minimal classes, and I was concerned about that, and we spoke about it. But I wanted to know what changes you had done with the curriculum for the students that are staying on for the 5th year from the U.S. So how many hours do they go, and what are you teaching them?
Okay. Okay, this modification we compact the last semester in one because I understand it's a recommendation for the Dental Board of California in years ago, and we see the best practice for our students. Compact all the topics in one semester, and they have a less free time because they are in the school all the time, full time.
Now they're full time.
Yes, in the next semester. Yes.
The last year of my son did not.
No,
minimal hours.
Because the change we are done made it.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that is happening, that they are
Yes.
taking advantage of the entire
Yes.
time while they're at school.
I think it's advantage is 9 semester. I think it's better now than then. I don't know if I answer
Yes,
your
yes.
question.
So is the program is licensed for 5 years, right? So how many years?
No,
is it
4
many?
years.
4 years?
4 years, yes, 4 years. And the IDP program, we have to add more semester, 9 semesters. But the career in Mexico is 4 years.
No, but the U.S., what is in law? What does it state? That it should be a 5-year program or a 4-year program? Dr. Morrow? What is approved by was it a 4-year program or a 5-year?
Yes, it was a 4-year program.
I might just interject here. The board has approved the school. The program length is determined by the school. Okay, so whether it's a 4-year or 5-year, if they make any changes from when it was approved by the board, they're supposed to notify us, but the school is approved. So the discussion of whether it's a 4-year, 5-year might be an interesting discussion to have, but they've been approved by the board in the past.
Yes, the board approves their educational program. And the school has different lengths of time for different programs, like the International Dentistry Program. Schools in the United States, schools in California have international dentistry programs. My university has one. It is a 2-year program. What that does is that it's really what's called an advanced placement. In other words, the applicants and those that are accepted into the International Dentistry Program have already graduated with a dental degree or an equivalent degree in a foreign country. So we are accepting them as an advanced placement. We're giving them credit for their previous education for the first 2 years of dental education in California. They then enter and complete the 3rd and the 4th year. Different schools have different requirements for entrance into their international dentistry program. I believe all schools in California except Western University in Pomona have an international dentistry program. So that's not an uncommon educational process for dental schools in the United States and certainly in California. So it's an advanced placement type of a situation. At the time that they graduate with the same license, with the same diploma, with the same curriculum, and with the same privileges and responsibilities that are carried by all graduates from that university.
Oh, I do understand about the IDP program. I was more concerned about the
Yeah.
regular program.
Yeah, so Dr. Stewart?
I think we had Dr. Chan as well.
Well, good morning and welcome. As I've been on the board, I'm understanding more of the complexities of the processes to have the board approval of the school as well as the content, and compliment you on that. So the first question I have is, as you mentioned, you were looking at the CODA approval. Where are you seeing the similarities and maybe differences in that? And just as a comment, CODA would appear to open opportunities for the school. So the first question is, where do you see similarities and maybe differences in the CODA process so far compared to the dental approval process? Is that an easy question or complex?
Okay, since my particular point of view, the big difference is that Dental Board of California has much more experience in the process than CODA. And the reason is because it was the first time for CODA to face this process. Dental Board of California has been in Mexico with us 2 or 3 times before. So Dental Board of California and us, we have more experience in this kind of process. This is the main difference for me. It's a personal opinion.
Yes.
What about the content, though? The content of the, what they're asking for? The content of the prescriptive elements of the approval. For example, the competencies. Are there differences with what you see for CODA so far as opposed to the dental?
As I understand, CODA and Dental Board of California have different competencies. Well, different number of competencies, right? That's the main difference I noticed. So it was necessary to reaccommodate all information we provided to CODA that the information we provided to Dental Board. Information is similar, but the way to present the information was quite different.
I have another question.
I think I'm going to go turn back to Dr. Lay, who is part of the subcommittee. And Dr. Lay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So the board did approve the school for a 5-year program in the past. Having said that, I'd like to I'd like to let you know that when we reviewed the application, the length of the academic program is not as important as the number of hours of didactic portion and also the clinical experiences that the students go through. So the same program could be implemented in a 5-year time period or in 4-year time period or even a 3-year time period, as long as the candidates meet the criteria, the institutional standards that we, establish. So I hope that answers Dr. Lon's question. So the fact that the school changed from a 5-year to 4 years or whatever, when we reviewed it, we reviewed the number of hours, the academic hours, and also the clinical experiences that the candidates, have to go through for the program. And we feel comfortable that that would meet the criteria established in the institutional standards.
I have a second part of my
Thank you, Dr. Lay.
questions. I have a second part. So the second part of the question has to do with the expanding opportunities with CODA versus the dental board. The original legislation that led to the process of a dental approval of schools was to address the shortfall of care for the Hispanic population. That was the entire driver of that legislation. So it's like looking at two parts of the question. The first part of the question is we have a list of where the graduates are going, but it's only the list of where they live. And the question is, if you are in contact with your alumni, would you share where they practice, which is maybe different than where they live? And that would be through the chair and through the executive office. And then the second thing is, with CODA, if the opportunities are opening, it may change the pipeline.
Excuse me, but I'm not sure, I'm not sure you really need to comment on that. I'm not sure what you were specifically asking, but if they get CODA approval, you're correct in that they no longer have to come to the board and that their students will be eligible for licensure in many states. With regard to where they're practicing, I don't know if it's appropriate to ask them. Okay, all right. Have your questions been answered?
No, but I would rather.
Okay, we will have another opportunity to talk about foreign dental schools, Dr. Chan, in our prior issues. So we have another opportunity to talk about foreign dental schools. So your questions may be answered there. Okay? Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
I think we're done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Agenda item 21, substance use awareness.
Hi, good morning. Carlos Alvarez, Enforcement Chief. I'm here to report the statistics for the diversion program for the last quarter, and which is March through March 31st of 2018. And currently, we have 14 participants in the program. We added one in March, and that was through a probation referral. So we kind of been steady at 13 for the last quarters, but we added one. And so currently, right now, the board is recruiting public members for the position on the northern deck for the committee, 2 dental positions in the southern deck, and 1 physician psychologist position in the southern deck, and 1 dental auxiliary position, both in the northern and southern deck. And so currently, right now, the next deck meeting is scheduled for July 11th, 2018 in Southern California. Any questions with diversion? So I'll move into agenda item 21B, and that is the update regarding Cures 2.0 and registration.
Just a second. Dr. Stewart, can we back up just a minute? I do
Sure.
have a question regarding the diversion program. And I will go out on a limb, I guess, and say if I'm out of order in asking this question, I'm sure that Michael will let me know quickly. Could you explain to me how our diversion program works with the California Dental Association's wellness plan?
Well, I'll let
They're separate.
Karen.
They're completely separate. They're completely separate.
Okay.
Ours is a diversion program. We can actually schedule a presentation because we've had Dr. Vixie, who's not only been a diversion in our part of our diversion evaluation committee, but he also is very knowledgeable about the CDA wellness program. So we can agendize that for a future meeting.
Yeah, I think it would be beneficial for us to have a better understanding as to how they interplay with each other.
Okay?
Thank you.
Further questions? I'm sorry. Am I missing? Dr. Chan?
I know we have other, Carlos, good morning.
Good morning.
We have other legislation coming up regarding cures. Can you foresee where we as a board can cull out information from cures just regarding dental prescribers? In other words, to warehouse this entire database and then see if there are things that are spiking up.
Yeah, we'd be able to get all that information from Department of Justice because the Department of Justice will report statistics. They will report they're not consulting with the database. They'll be giving us all that information to us. Okay. So we'll be able to keep data for that as well. So we could, if an issue comes up during the board meeting, we can speak about it, and I can have some data for it for the board members.
That answers your question, Dr. Shan?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. And so I'll get to agenda 21B for Cures registration. And we have the registered numbers. We're not at the numbers that we wish that we were at. Currently, from the Drug Enforcement Administration, there is 24,633 California dentists licensed to prescribe. And currently, April 2018, we're just at 9,662. But it did increase from January to April by 1,292. But again, it did increase, but it's not the numbers that we wanted at. And so with CDA being here in town, the convention, what we did was we created posters for our booth that we have at the convention. So our posters have you registered with Cures. So we're going to utilize CDA, the convention, to see if we could promote this and increase our numbers for licensed dentists to register with Cures. So we're going to use that. And we also been passing out flyers when we're requesting, records. The flyers were also given to our sworn investigators, so when they walk in to a dental office, they pass out that flyer saying, "Are you registered with Cures?" And we also did email blasts. So we've been proactive in trying to increase these numbers. Yes.
Could there be a checkbox on the reapplication for a license? As if asking the question, have you registered?
We did,
Cures.
yeah. I'm sorry.
We're looking into how to be able to track this better. Making any changes to Breeze, of course, is a monumental task, but we're in the process of looking into that. And I was going to ask Mary if they've done anything recently in their publications to let people know, essentially they're in violation if they have not registered, which they were supposed to have done by July 1st of 2016. If they're not registered, they're in violation of the Dental Practice Act, in essence. So we want to try to encourage people to utilize, because then Carlos will go on to the next section, which was in October of this year. If you write a script, you're required to check cures before doing so. Of course, there are exceptions, but they've had 2 years to get registered, and we're having a difficult time getting the word out, or they're just violating the Dental Practice Act. So getting to your question, Dr. Lai, we're working on seeing how we can better track the licensees, and we are looking into Breeze and whether that's a question that can be asked during the renewal period.
Have we identified why there's a reluctancy in doing so? I don't see what.
No.
There's no IDing that.
No.
And like I said, we've been proactive, email blast, flyers, and like I said, our registering numbers just gone up as the way.
If Mary can respond to my question, then we can get back to the board member questions.
So CDA has been, for the past couple of years, doing periodic updates and articles. Most recently, the Cures database has been certified, so the LARA bill will actually go into effect October 2nd. We made a huge update article about that and sent that out to our over 27,000 members at this point. The other thing we've done recently, I think in the past couple weeks, is that we sent out a more serious, different type of notice in TDIC renewal notices that looks, I think, a little bit more official if people are kind of glazing over when they're looking at the updates, because we do talk about Cures a lot. We have gotten a couple of callbacks to our practice support center asking about the Cures database from that specific renewal notice. And to quickly answer your question, I think probably one of the reasons why dentists aren't looking at this or taking this seriously is that they either don't think that the law applies to them because they prescribe so infrequently, maybe not even once a year, or they simply forgot that they have a DEA notice. So what we're seeing, or a DEA registration, so what we're hopefully going to see is either a decline in DEA registrations after 2 years, or hopefully higher compliance.
Dr. Chan.
So the field of licensed dentists is over 30,000. And yet for cures, there's less than a third. But we don't know how many, like Mary said, have DEA permits and are registered. Is there a way of culling that out, or requesting information from the feds on that and then work backwards? That's the first thing. And the second thing is, that's going to be monumental trying to attack 2/3 of the licensees in California on cures.
And there has been discussion with the EA, Department of Justice, in order to release those numbers. And so, because we also have a liaison, which is Kelly Silva, reaching out to say, could we have these numbers and identify who these dentists are, but they just don't want to release that information now. But we have tried. In order to answer this question here is, how could we raise the registration numbers?
Thank you.
Dr. Lauren?
I'm sorry, I wanted to ask CDA if it would be possible to have an area, I don't know if you can do that, at CDA convention where somebody could sign up for cures. Is that possible?
So we have that currently with Practice Support Center in CDA Presents. We also, in Actually, this Saturday, we're going to be doing our semi-annual opioid course, substance abuse course. And we always have a reminder to do that in that course, as well as our CDPA courses. That's something that we always talk about as well.
You bet.
You may or may not be on, well, I'm just in terms of making suggestions, and you probably have thought about every suggestion in the book. But where we're talking about somewhat penalizing or just sending out notifications, and it's more like a penalty. Could it be that, and I know CEU credits are offered, could we take a more positive approach? I don't know if professionals tend to notice that. Is that a possibility, or is that a reality, or does that even make any sense to offer some kind of credits for people who sign up for this, or will it be such that it's more trouble than it's worth? I don't know. Attracting bees with honey.
Well, I believe that we have some legislation that is being discussed at the end of, later in the meeting today about adding this to CE credits. So I think your comment is timely.
Dr. Morrow, did you have? You're good.
I remember some time ago when we had a presentation from Cures, one of the big things was the lack of staff. Have you heard whether they have staffed up any?
Yes, they have, and that's why as of October 2nd, that's when it's going to enter effect now, because they have the appropriate staffing now.
Okay.
So that notice was sent out to us in April, saying that effective October 2nd, now it's going to be up and running. The system's going to be up and running, and they have the appropriate staff to man it now.
Okay, so now you actually get somebody to answer the phone?
Yes.
Okay.
They have.
Okay.
Okay, Carlos.
And so from October, and I'll go back, October 27th through December 31st of 2017, so there was 3,043 dentists that did create patient activity reports within and check the patient's prescription history. So that is a plus that there are physicians, dentists that are using this system. And so, like I stated, as we get into when it takes effect, it's October 2nd of 2018. It takes effect where now if a dentist, a physician is gonna issue any type of medication, any Schedule 2, 4, they have to consult with the database now. And so now, since they have the appropriate staffing, they'll notify us of that issue, and then we'll take it by case basis to investigate that, and we'll move forward with that. So now also with CDA here, we created a poster for this now, for that it takes effect October 22nd, 2018. So now we also have you registered with Cures, and now we're also saying that this is taking effect October 2nd of 2018. And also what we did is, what we're gonna do is we're gonna send out email blast as well, informing everybody that, all the dentists, that it's taking effect. We also are creating a tab within our web for Cures. So if you click on that tab, it'll take you to Cures, and we're gonna have a flyer here that everybody has in front of you, where it gives information about Cures. It gives you tips. We're gonna have that on our website. We're gonna have links on our website, and that'll also take you direct. If there's a physician that has any questions about registering or information about Cures, they could click on that, and they'll take them directly to the Department of Justice.
Are you in contact with them? Talk to them often? Cures, the administrator of Cures?
We have, like I said, Kelly Silva, and she's our liaison and reports back to our meeting. And so by the next meeting, I'll find out what the discussion was.
Can you ask her about why the password needs to be changed every 3 months?
Yes, and there is a reason. I can't remember at this time, but there is a reason. Yeah, it's for security purposes, and so they keep requesting to change the passwords. Yeah, so we have no control over that. Yeah. Is there any more questions, cures? So I'll move to agenda item 21C, and that was the SOS meeting, statewide opiate safety work group meeting that is held. And so the big thing right now that came on, it's the Naloxone grant, which also is Narcan. And Narcan, which it counteracts with life-threatening effects of opiate overdose. So there is a program there, and so they started reaching out to all these different health departments to supply them with Narcan. So currently, there's 58 out of 61 local health departments have accepted to offer to receive the grant and receive Narcan. And there's also 20 others that have opted to receive additional Narcan in lieu of administrative costs. And so it's anticipated that these local health departments should have the Narcan distributed to them by next month. So they have June 30th of 2018 that it should be completed and distributed. And also there's distribution plans submitted where there's 22 syringe exchange programs will receive about 13,000 doses. There's also 2 substance abuse disorder treatment services that will receive about 11,000 doses. And 17 homeless programs will receive 2,000 doses. And there's also 57 law enforcement agencies that will receive 12,000 doses of Narcan. And currently there's 5 jails that will receive 260 doses for Narcan to help the opiate overdose. And also I'm sorry, someone had a question? I'm sorry. And also what was discussed on April 21st of 2017, Department of Health and Human Services announced funding through the century for the CURES Act to address the national opiate crisis. And so California will receive $90 million over a period of 2 years, which started in May 2017 and will go through May of 2019. And that's to implement the California Medication Assisted Treatment, what's called MAT. So currently, they're also known as MAT teams or MAT hubs. And there's currently 19 of them across the state of California. So within those teams, they have physicians, they have nurses, and they have behavioral health specialists within these teams. And so where these MAT teams are, it was first identified the counties that had the highest rate for overdoses. And that's where they established some of the MAT teams, and also in rural areas. So currently there's 19 of them right now in the state of California. And also, it's also been identified through a study from the California Department of Health that it was 14.3% of high school students, or 1 out of 5 high school students, reported using prescription drugs without a prescription. And also with this, hepatitis C has increased now. So there's a 4.2%, and that was through 2011 through 2015. And that has affected the persons between the ages of 15 and 29. So now, on a national level, that's being addressed now, hepatitis C and opiate overdose. And so President Trump's budget request for 2019 includes $40 million to combat the nationwide opiate crisis, and also to identify the epidemic of HIV and hepatitis C. So our next statewide safety work group meeting is scheduled for May 31st of 2018.
Yvette.
I don't know about California. I knew that some other states are tackling this opioid problem. However, to your knowledge, do you know if we're looking at the opioid problem from a a higher level. In other words, opioid distribution centers, because they have to get it somewhere. They have to get the opioids. Are we making it easier for them to get it? You know, I come from a nonprofit world, and we're always, you know, rescuing babies from the ocean. What we don't do is find out who's throwing the babies in the ocean. So are we looking at who's throwing the babies in the ocean?
Yes, and so what it was, that has been discussed, and it's also come out in the news where there's some counties now suing the makers now because of this crisis. And so I kind of want to be kind of delicate. I don't want to give much information. But it is being addressed. And like I said, there's one recently where it came out in the news that counties are now suing the makers now.
What about legislation? What about legislation with the opioid centers being open, or pharmacies that are allowing very lax policies? Is that being addressed? Because you'll be fighting this thing from now until this time 100 years from now if you're not tackling it from a higher level.
It's being addressed because like the information that we're getting is we stay in contact with the pharmacy board because they also get affected with that. So they're also working on it, and part of this flyer was actually by the pharmacy board so we could have all the information. But across all boards, state of California, you know, with meetings now, it is being addressed, and it's, like I said, it's getting more serious and serious, and it's being answered. Yes.
Dr. Lauren.
Hi. While I was doing my research for opioids, I came upon a said that now that they reduced the amount of opioids that were prescribed, there's more overdoses with other drugs. Is that correct? Do you know anything about that?
Not too offhand, but just from experience, I'll just talk, like I said, from experience is once you take one drug away and somebody hooked on the drug, they'll seek another type of drug. So if they're moving away and making it stricter with medication, prescription drug abuse, what they're going to do is now seek another drug. So that might come into play where that percentage is coming up. So it's reducing. The prescription drugs are probably reducing, but they're seeking other drugs.
Included in that were many more deaths. That's what I heard.
Yeah. So they'll find another drug to supplement their addiction.
Okay, Carlos, I think we can go on.
Okay. And so that concluded my portion here with substance abuse.
Public comment?
Dr. Atchison, Academy of General Dentistry. Actually, this cures thing is really confusing to general dentists. We've had like 2 final deadlines. 2016, we were supposed to all be registered. Now it's 2018 again, so people are October.
2016 was to register.
Yeah.
And now the deadline in October is to actually utilize it before you write a script.
Okay.
So the registration was, you know, should have been easy, just sign up. Whether or not you have to
Well, from
utilize
questions, people are confused on that. Now we have a hard deadline in October to use it. We're getting mixed messages on, and Carlos, out of his own words, said, you know, we're required to consult with Cures before we write any prescription. But it was my understanding, in some articles from CDA, that dentists have another exception if we write a single prescription for narcotics with no refill, following a surgical procedure, not to exceed a 5-day dose. So we have to be clear on that, because one of my partners argues with me that there's no exceptions. So what is there an exception for dentistry for what I just stated?
Well, getting back to the first question, so there's no exception to not registering if you have a DEA license and a California dental license.
clear on
Okay,
that.
so that one. The exceptions are for any prescriber, and they are included in this handout or this information sheet. So this is going to be posted on our website. Do we have additional copies available for stakeholders here?
I have to check to see if we received the flyers that we ordered.
Okay.
As of yesterday, we just didn't have it for the board members.
Jerry, if you would give Dr. Atchison my copy, and it will be posted on the website.
Okay,
And,
so that exception that I stated, you can't give me a clear
Well,
answer on
we,
that?
staff doesn't advise.
Okay,
We're hoping that we have information out there, perhaps in this flyer or between the Cures website, frequently asked questions. So we have really made an effort, as frustrating as it is to licensees, when they call and ask for clarification, we try to lead them in a certain direction, but we really can't, because that would be considered an underground regulation. And so I'd ask that you go ahead and consult that flyer that we've put out. And I think perhaps additional information is going to be provided through the continuing education courses that are being offered at CDA. I don't know what those courses at CDA.
okay.
Okay.
It's just very confusing. Just as, and just an aside, we're getting prescription pads rejected again by pharmacies for printer errors.
I didn't see that. I didn't see your name on that. We've been notified. Yeah, we've been notified.
Okay. I
So
mean, beyond the checkbox is coming now,
Well,
other things.
And not to engage you in this discussion, but you've seen the legislation that's coming through, essentially saying that they want to ease out paper and go with e-prescriptions. So it's some sort of conspiracy, I'm guessing.
Thank you.
Further public comment? Seeing none, thank you, Carlos.
Thank you.
All right, we're moving to 21D. 21D, discussion and possible action regarding Senate 1109 Bates, controlled substances, Schedule II drugs, opioids. I believe, Fran, are you going to start that discussion?
Okay. I think a copy of the legislation is there in your packet. It has a number of provisions, but we are specifically looking at two of them. Let me just give you some background because I often hear that dentists think that they are not a part of this problem. And I want to tell you that there are plenty of statistics that indicate they are. There is something that Dr. Chan gave us from the American Dental Association that indicated that dentists wrote 6.4% of all opioid prescriptions in the United States in 2012. Within the population of those privately insured for the dental needs in the U.S., the number of opioid prescriptions per 1,000 dental patients increased from 2010 to 2015, especially for those between the ages of 11 and 18. So what SB 1109 does is it addresses the addiction, misuse, and prescription opioids as a public health crisis by putting some educational tools in place for both patients, parents, minors, and prescribers to assist them in making decisions about their prescriptions. So what this bill does is it authorizes the board as a condition of license renewal to require licensees to successfully complete of required continued education, CE hours, in specific areas: patient care, health and safety, law and ethics. Currently, dentists have about 50 hours of approved CE, and dental auxiliaries must complete 5 units of control of approved CEs as a requirement for license renewal every 2 years. This bill would amend a section of the BMP code and make as a condition of license renewal that licensees successfully complete a portion of required continuing education in the areas above and will add within that the risk of addiction associated with the use of 2 drugs. The mandatory coursework adopted in regulations and prescribed by the board shall not exceed 15 hours per renewal period for dentists and 7.5 hours for dental auxiliaries. For retired dentists, only those providing only uncompensated care, the board shall require not more than 60% of the hours of continuing education required for other licenses. As a provision of this bill, then the board is required to report the outcome at the next sunset review period. So within that, there is a section of the Health and Safety Code which requires a prescriber to discuss all of the following with the minor: the minor's parent or guardian or another adult, the risk of addiction and overdose associated with opioids, the increased risk of addiction to an opioid to an individual who is suffering from both mental and substance abuse disorders. And sometimes that's a question that in prescribing, there's a little bit of a failure to ask that question, because that can help you to decide what in fact you will prescribe. In addition, the danger of taking an opioid with alcohol or other central nervous system depressions. The board would have to adopt the regulations, the mandatory, regarding the mandatory coursework. And this bill, we had a discussion yesterday about whether or not to, whether at what point we should take a specific adopt position on bills. And this bill is another example of one that has been amended. This bill was amended last on May 2nd, May 8th. And that May 8th. She just passed that out. Okay. Tabbed where the changes. Okay. And I want to tell you what the changes are. There was a requirement initially that the bill would be a violation, but the violation would not be a criminal violation, a criminal offense. That language has been stricken. Also, what has been stricken is the provision would say that we would have disciplinary action. So that was one of the amendments. The second amendment has to do with written consent. For both long and short-term prescriptions. Let me back up and say also that when the bill was initially written, there was some language in it that said that this would cause some of the medical boards prescribing guidelines, some issues that they've been working on for a number of years now, and that language has also been stricken. So what we will ask for after discussion is that the board take an action. And the actions that we could take is to support if amended, to oppose, to watch, to be neutral, or take no action. I'm going to put my bias right out there and say, I don't even want to talk to anybody about watching. It's time for this board to step forward and be on record as wanting to be a part of the solution of what's going on in this area. So with that, I would open it for discussion. There are questions?
Dr. Chan, I see a hand.
I am also supportive of the concept. Let me ask the two different pieces here. The first one is about the continuing ed and realizing that the content of what the continuing ed is downstream yet. But what jumps out is the statistic that there is an increase of dental patients from 11 to 18 pediatric patients. So I'm really sensitive to that. And then as a corollary to that, in our literature, we do see more and more personal stories of dentists with their children dying from opioid deaths. Now, we should know better that's happening to us. So the question downstream again is the continuing ed incorporating some component of pediatric pharmacology. The second part is about the informed consent when you prescribe something. So that takes an action where you've already made a decision to prescribe and you're informing the parent and the kid what can happen. But the decision comes before that, whether or not you make a decision to prescribe an opioid for that kid, which goes back to number one, which is the content of the courses.
Okay, we've had this discussion, and I think the important thing for us to now is to think about whether we want to adopt language to say that there is a course. Okay. What we're not in law, and nowhere in here are we proscribing what the content of that course would be. That's something that will be addressed during the regulatory process.
If I may add, recently the American Dental Association came out as part of their policy to encourage states to implementatory CE around this issue of opioid misuse and abuse. And I have a list of states that have made mandatory CE as part of their state solution to this. And California to date has not. And what we're coming to this board for with this after this discussion is whether or not this board thinks it's appropriate to be more proactive, get on board, and implement a certain number of hours of continuing education that will cover a number of issues relative to this crisis so that we're more a part of the solution than we have been to date. We've been studying this issue for years. We've been in place for years, And my suggestion is it's now time to move it up, get a mandatory course in place so that our prescribers have access to the changing paradigms of how to prescribe what we're prescribing, and will help us become part of the solution moving forward, because this is a crisis, and I think it's time for us to act. And I want to support Fran's suggestion that we support this language. We give our staff opportunities to spend time describing what that might look like. But the important decision is that we're going to move forward and either address mandatory CE or not. And that's what I'm hoping to have this discussion about this morning.
How many states are there? Do you know?
Well,
it
I have the list, and I think it was. It's quite it doesn't say how many, but there's a lot of yeses in these columns. I can pass this around.
Okay.
Probably 25, 30 states require mandatory CE now, and
Okay. And before we go on, I realized that I didn't answer the second part of your question, and it had to do with discussions about alternatives. That's also been something that has been talked about and talked about and talked about, that there is an opportunity that perhaps an opioid is not necessary. I personally feel that the amount of prescribing sometimes is something else to think about. Because, for an example, to prescribe 20 pills for an extraction, I think it's a bit much. So there are some other things that we also need to talk. But I agree with Dr. Stewart. We've talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. It was years ago now that I was at the summit in San Francisco, and we started that discussion then. We started the committee then. We've not been as proactive as we should be. So I think I saw Dr. Morrow's hand, or you guys gonna fight it out, or?
I second it. I'll second it.
I didn't hear what she said.
So just to understand, at this point, there's been sort of two separate discussions. This bill would introduce the risk exposure to opioids and whatever. Whether or not you'd be supporting that is one issue. Whether the board, through the regulatory arena, would decide to make it a mandatory course, because this does not make it a mandatory course. This bill does not make it a mandatory course. So the guide through regulatory process, and if I'm speaking out of line, Sarah, let me know. Through the regulatory process, then the board could develop language that would clarify that section to mean you're requiring it as a mandatory course, like the dental practice control and basic life support upon renewal. That would be done in the regulatory process, as would perhaps course requirements. And so then that would open up an area where the board essentially would be accepting to provide CE credits, board-approved CE credits for a mandatory coursework. So those are two separate issues. I think that if right now the board should be considering whether to support this piece of legislation, and the second part of it could be whether or not we can get agreement at this point that you would consider pursuing a regulatory package, assuming this passes. Okay? So the motion, let's get the motion and the second and then open it for discussion. Are you agree with that?
Chan.
Okay, you agree with the motion to support this legislation?
And then Dr. Morrow.
I do. I was just going to make the motion to support the it's already been done and seconded, so.
Okay.
Okay. So everybody understands the motion. The motion is this bill. That's the first question. And before we take the vote, public comment.
Mary with CDA. CDA also supports this bill. We just came out in support probably less than a week ago. We wanted to make sure that our support and concerns that the dental board has in terms of implementation. It looks like right now in its current reading, the implementation date would be 2019. So we wanted to make sure with you guys, if there is any regulations that do need to be promulgated, that effective date would not be problematic for you. And if not, it's not relevant right now, but we just wanted to make sure beforehand.
I currently read the language as permissive. The board may promulgate regulations to require the mandatory courses, and there isn't a deadline for us, so I think it should be fine. I don't have any concerns with that.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Any other public comment?
Sorry, the only other thing I wanted to say was I know that the copy that Jerry passed out was for the most recent amendment, which was from May 8th. And then I wanted to let you guys know that there was a hearing by the Appropriations Committee in the Senate on the 14th. It did pass. And so now it's on the Senate floor if it gets out, it'll go through the assembly process. But I just wanted to give you guys that update.
Okay. I forgot that you told me that.
Dr. Lai.
I just want to make a comment. I'm in support of the bill, but this was confusing to me that the 11 to 18 and where are they getting the drugs from? I very wisdom teeth haven't even basically come in yet, and we don't prescribe. We prescribe a lot of prescriptions, but not prescriptions with a large quantity. So I just want to go on record saying, could be coming from somewhere else. We do need to rein in our part, but in support of dentists, I don't think we prescribe, 100 pills for maybe a sports injury or something. And I am in support, but I just want to make that comment.
Dr. Chan?
So, Fran, if you could clarify, did you say there was something struck about removing disciplinary action or unprofessional conduct in this?
On
I
page
can't find it.
on page 4 of what Jerry passed out, so you'll see what's struck.
Got-
Essentially, it says the
oh,
bill
oh.
would provide that a violation of these requirements is not a criminal offense. The rest of it is struck.
So-
But would subject the prescriber to disciplinary action for unprofessional conduct under the prescriber's respective license. That's been struck.
Oh.
Okay?
Okay, so the question is, I know, but I need clarification. And the clarification is, it looks like, would this be for us, looking downstream, from the Dental Practice Act courses that we require? Or do we get 2 bites of the apple? In other words,
You're not required currently to take. You required a certain number of hours.
Right.
You do law and ethics, you do the other two, but you're not currently required to take any course here. That's what this bill does.
and the question is, can we do, I'm sorry, I'm going to drop it because
I know
it's
where you're coming
downstream.
from.
Yeah.
I know where you're coming from, so we can have that sidebar discussion. Okay. To clarify, this bill only allows us essentially to include this topic as a continuing education requirement. Okay, it It's not mandatory that the licensees take it, but it will be added to our list of courses that are available. Okay, and then step 2 would be, if this passes through the regulatory process, we not only add this to our list of courses, but the board decides whether they want to actually make this course a mandatory course. So for the purposes of the discussion today, the bill is only essentially adding it as a possible course. Okay, so
So there's not anything else? We can call for the vote?
Okay, calling for the vote. Burden? Yes. Chan? Yes. Chappelle Ingram here. Lai? Yes. Laren?
Yes.
Lay? Mackenzie?
Yes.
Medina absent. Morrow? Yes. Olagi? Pacheco? Yes. Stewart?
Yes.
Witcher? Yes. You? We have it passes.
Okay, since we didn't agendize talking about the regulatory process, making it mandatory, I heard what the minimal discussion was in that area, so we will be bringing some suggestions back and agendize it for discussion at the August meeting. Is that appropriate, Michael? Okay, that's what we'll do. Sorry.
Okay, and just before we finish this discussion, let's be on record as asking staff to send a letter to the author, and since the bill is going to this assembly now, to the appropriate committee.
Oh,
I think Sarah has a question, Fran. if it-
Just to tag on to what Karen just mentioned, to bring information back at the August meeting, it would be helpful to staff and subject matter experts to help lead staff.
Well, as I'm thinking about what I just said, as I reran it in my mind, we can start working on this, but if the legislation doesn't pass, we may consider this actually as something we want to address in the event that this doesn't pass. We want to try to say, we would like something like this in our sunset review if this doesn't pass.
We actually also, as I read this current statute, we already have it's the broad authority to require mandatory courses where this could be inserted into. So whether this bill passes in particular, we would still be able to work on a regulation in the future. I want to make sure I'm clear on what the direction is for the August meeting. If you're expecting proposed language for regs, then we're going to need additional subject matter expert help. Okay, so we'll add it to the list of potential regs.
All right, I think we're on agenda item 22, but I think this might be a good time. I think people are asking for a checkout, a restroom break, and maybe grab a snack, come back in 30 minutes, because I think we're going to try to power through. So if you can grab something, there's a deli outside or Starbucks or something, grab something and come back at about 12:30.